Why don't we go ahead and we can go ahead and go. We are live. Good. So please, again, welcome to the governor. Welcome to your staff and others who are participating today. And Don, why don't we start and call the roll?
Good morning, members of the committee. Representative Kinner. Here. Representative Larson. Here. Representative Schwartz. Here. Representative Simpson. Here. Representative Stith. Here. Representative Walters. Here. Senator Garou. Here. Senator Hicks. Here. Senator Kinski. Here. Senator Steinmetz.
Excused.
Co-Chairman Nicholas. Here. Chairman Perkins.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Well, the first item on our agenda this morning is the governor. So, Your Excellency, we welcome you, and we're happy to hear where we've got. I think we delivered copies of your message and your letter last night. I think most of us have reviewed that. So we'll go ahead and turn time over to you. So take the time. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee. Our hearts certainly go out to Senator Steinmetz. I'm really sorry to hear of her news, and we thank you, Representative Larson, for your words. We will certainly all pray for a positive outcome. As promised, and as you have indicated, you have my letter laying out recommendations on how to utilize the American Rescue Plan dollars. As I had indicated to you before, we would present this plan after we presented our standard 2023-24 budget. Owing to the significance of the ARPA dollars, we also suggested we would bring this plan to you in December, representing the work of many months of deliberation, public input, and analysis. These ARPA dollars offer significant opportunities as well as temptations for us all. What you ultimately choose to do with these dollars could amount to a very significant budget change. But it is my hope the tables of proposals I am submitting for consideration today will help frame and temper our approach. But before I begin, let me thank you for the many hours your committee gave to public dialogue about the American Rescue Plan Act earlier this year. I believe that open discourse was good for Wyoming because it allowed us all to discuss ways to make Wyoming better. Your public meetings and inclusion of ARPA in the agenda provided ample opportunity for public updates about the process and avenues for constructive dialogue. Our process was transparent, and I am confident these conversations will continue as you take up this exercise. Nevertheless, the opportunities you gave us to update you on our work allowed you to know that many people from across the state were hard at work creating a strategy, goals, and proposals. It also gave the public a chance to learn what was being discussed. The first round of those proposals are what you have before you today. They total less than $500 million in projects, with much held back for more analysis in future years and for potential savings. These proposals make use of both American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds, and other one-time investments made possible because of these federal dollars. Let me begin by offering my thanks to the strike team and members of the public that have been involved in this effort so far. Specifically, members of my cabinet are here: Director of Department of Family Services, Director Schmidt, Director of Workforce Service, Director Cooley, and Interim Director of the Department of Health, Director Johansson. I also want to thank Kevin Hibbard, Director Hibbard, who's here as well, and representatives from the Wyoming Business Council who served on the strike team. A special thank you is in order for you, Co-Chairman Nicholas, for your time participating in the planning. Not here today, but also involved are Mayor Matt Hall from Cody and Commissioner Jim Willix from Converse County. Randy McKay to my right and Erica Legursky to my left from my staff worked on this project, as well as Randall Luthi and others. And I want to thank them. All of these people gave many, many hours to this effort, almost all of that time in addition to other duties. Their task was complex, both because of what they had to consider and how the act is meant to be implemented. ARPA totals $1.9 trillion in federal spending across the country. Senator Hicks, you and I have talked a lot about what those dollars mean, and I appreciate that conversation. It created dozens and dozens of new federal programs, all of which must be tracked. Moreover, ARPA was only one of 6 other federal COVID bills that sent more than $4 billion to Wyoming. Only about 20% of that $1.9 trillion came to the states, counties, cities, and tribes under the coronavirus and local fiscal recovery funds. Even so, that funding must be looked at in context with other federal funds. In May, the state of Wyoming received $534 million of this ARPA funding, and we are expected to receive a second payment of the same amount in 2022. Just over $1 billion in total. Counties, municipalities, and tribes are also receiving funding independently. You have heard me say that I believe these funds must be spent strategically and provide benefits to our grandchildren. That is what has guided my recommendations and criteria for supporting projects. This lens has been valuable and helped focus our efforts on what will make Wyoming stronger. While many projects and proposals did not get funding at this time, many of them are ideas worth considering in the future. We sought to save some powder for them for their consideration later. Others are eligible or may be eligible to be funded through the infrastructure legislation passed into law in November, and thus should be considered in the fullness of that bill's rollout. All told, we received nearly $4 billion in requests, far more than we could fund. My recommendations to you today total just under $500 million, about an eighth of what was requested. We recommended that the rest of Wyoming's $1 billion share be set aside in straight up savings or for ideas and projects that might be further refined next year and funded later. A friend of mine is fond of saying, money flies around the world looking for a place to get lost. To be sure, there are many needs in Wyoming, but we have the benefit of time, and that is a luxury we cannot afford to overlook when vetting these projects. With that, let me walk you through the table of proposals. The first section of the proposal is for funding using ARPA revenue replacement dollars or general funds that are available because of ARPA substitution. Wyoming is invested in continued energy development. It is a vital component of our current and future economy. Significantly, a lot has changed over the past few years, and accordingly, the largest request is to position Wyoming early next year to take advantage of investments in energy projects. While we are certainly not throwing in the towel on anything in our all of the above energy strategy, there are possibilities for both significant private and federally funded projects that will position Wyoming as a continued energy powerhouse in the new energy paradigm. Wyoming must be competitive in the application for money to match dollars on carbon capture utilization storage, carbon capture on coal gas fired utility plants, carbon dioxide transportation, industrial carbon capture, refined coal, hydrogen production, transportation, storage, and/or hub development, wind, battery development, or solar. For example, the infrastructure bill will likely fund only one commercial CCUS project at a coal-fired plant in the West. I want Wyoming to have every opportunity to land that facility. Creating access to matching funds positions us for that success, as does our further research. These funding opportunities are expected to be announced early next year. We will have limited time to respond, so we need to build a system that allows for those opportunities. I propose that this go to the LSRA, the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account, but with the ability to access these funds under conditions we work on together. These conditions should be rigorous, practical, and substantive. The next 5 proposals all spin off our ability to act nimbly and quickly. They would support business development, grant writing, project analysis, community engagement, business grants, and generally give Wyoming resources necessary to transform and add value to the resources we already have. We support private businesses willing to invest in Wyoming. Wyoming wrote an excellent proposal for the Federal Economic Development Administration's Coal Community Program, and we were turned down, as was Campbell County, Montana, North Dakota, and despite our leadership in all of these technologies. Just this morning from Governor Burgum of North Dakota, he was saying 0 for 4. Seems like a political use of the Carbon Community Program. I would agree. As we evaluate other proposals, it is important that we have a commitment to dollars necessary to make the most of our opportunities. This effort is not just about federal programs and grants, but it is also about having resources to support private businesses so we can maximize projects. You know, as treasurer, I've had the experience, and I understand that that is a tricky business. And Wyoming must be sober in assessing our opportunities. But we will be losing industry, and we must fight to protect and create as many jobs and protect as many careers as we can for these important projects in Wyoming. The next proposal for the Wyoming is for the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, and it is another example of looking to the future. We are looking at a whole new way of funding post-secondary education. We have been working with community colleges and the university to establish funding that is nimble and deployable to meet the needs of emerging workforce development programs, to support economic innovation, and to meet the challenges of providing the most up-to-date and relevant technologies in these programs. Rather than funding programs that have skinflint constituencies always eager to use state funds to fund them, we are proposing an approach that allows funding to flow to courses as needed, as they can be leveraged across platforms and across institutions. I am asking for these funds to be distributed through my office under rigorous conditions, which include a return on investment, retention of students in Wyoming, and the quality of jobs located here in Wyoming. Furthermore, I am proposing we measure the results and sunset programs expeditiously if they fail to yield desired results. I especially want to thank UW, the community colleges, the Business Council, and Workforce Services for their strong and collaborative work in fleshing out this partnership. It is the first of its kind and certainly a novel endeavor for Wyoming. I look forward to where it will go. Our institutions of higher education had very large and worthy asks, yet this budget proposes to fund only a fraction of them. We still have some distance to go in refining this approach to funding, and we have built some more time into phase 2 and phase 3 of WIP so that institutions can better articulate plans to make sure any funding is one time and the path to finding follow-on funding is very clear. The next programs are very specific proposals that are meant to be catalysts for economic development and diversification. But again, these are just initial investments. If funded, these would provide better context for you next year with a better data that will refine the value of these initiatives. These refer to the agricultural strategy through community revitalization study. Next up, with regard to Cultural Trust Fund and humanities grants, I have proposals that would allow us to support more opportunities for arts and historic programming, as well as the humanities. I come from a town with a lot of history. Most of us do. We are fortunate to enjoy the kinds of amenities that make our places more livable. The outcome of these proposals would be lasting for our main streets, for our communities, for the arts, for historic programs, and most importantly, for the families and businesses that want to locate in our towns. Investing these dollars in the corpus of the Cultural Resource Trust, for example, will make sure that these programs give back to Wyoming for decades to come. Lastly, are some notable investments in another part of what makes Wyoming special, our outdoor heritage and lifestyle. The outdoor rec program would make substantially more dollars available to local communities that have been doing planning for how to build trails, parks, and other recreational facilities. These are efforts that bring in more visitors and, more importantly, make our cities and towns much more a special place, both to residents and as a destination for visitors. Tourism and outdoor recreation have become major contributors to our revenues. Most of those dollars are paid for by visitors, not our citizens. We need to keep in mind that wildlife, hunting and fishing are opportunities that really cannot be built. We in Wyoming treasure healthy wildlife populations, good fishing opportunities, and the ability to give back a little something to ourselves in the process. This is a time to try to fully fund the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. Doing so will put more money into our state, benefiting jobs, working on habitat projects, infrastructure that will keep our farms in better shape, and most importantly, help us to conserve our elk, mule deer, trout, and other wildlife species, as well as our open spaces. Lastly, the federal infrastructure bill has funding in it for wildlife highway crossings that will likely require state matching funds. The Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust can help with that. These projects are very expensive and may well need more money in the year ahead to secure these competitive grants. Wyoming is recognized as a leader in wildlife management, and we should keep it that way. On the next table are proposals that are ARPA eligible. We will be doing more analysis on these now that we have a contractor on board to help with it. Today, noting these proposals could be subject to change for the benefit of a more complete analysis, I propose making a very significant investment first in a more flexible and responsive housing program. The WCDA currently uses only federal dollars for housing, and we believe there are additional opportunities for Wyoming to meet its unique housing needs with ARPA. Workforce and affordable housing is consistently mentioned as one of the most pressing issues and constraints facing businesses in Wyoming at this time. This proposal aims squarely at working to solve that problem. Next, ARPA does allow for tourism-related projects, and this proposal is for a pilot of grants to communities to help them secure facilities to draw tourists. Teton County saw record revenues from tourism this year, and it's my belief that we can spread that joy around just a little bit better. With apologies, Senator Peru. The third proposal on page 10 is to allow several already approved business-ready community projects to move ahead and pay for the inflationary increases in costs on 10 projects. Because COVID has had impacts on budgets and project costs, the next proposals are eligible in our first analysis. Next up is a proposal for funding to use ARPA to support workforce and job training. This is tied to WIP, as workforce development is central to that effort, both through higher education and the Department of Workforce Services. ARPA has specific rules describing what is eligible and what is not, as well as identifying who can use ARPA workforce programs. This would allow us to meet the guidelines of the U.S. Treasury and help with many workforce needs. Broadband is ever important, and our proposal is at the top of page 11. I am requesting perhaps a lower funding figure with ARPA than you may have anticipated because we have several other pots of funding for this same use. We have applied for more than $30 million already from the NTIA. On top of that, Wyoming has $109 million on the Capital Projects Fund, which is aimed at connectivity and broadband infrastructure. Additionally, Wyoming is likely to get $100 million for broadband in the infrastructure bill. Thus, I believe strongly that broadband can help Wyoming thrive in the future, and I am committed to putting a significant investment into connectivity, but this does not need to be the funding source. The following proposals in the table are focused on health and human services more specifically. The first proposal is related to staffing. I believe the workforce training programs are important, but first we should try to keep the workforce we have. That's why I've already invested in premium pay for essential workers in healthcare. This adds to that and adds to what we would do for those who save lives and have taken care of the most vulnerable over the past 2 years. I also propose a pool of funding that applicants can use and apply towards healthcare and human services, CAPCON. This could be to support eligible hospital projects or even senior care and service projects. Health and Human Services is also an area where we need to innovate, look for more ways to serve our rural state, and get care to those who need it. This builds off something you all did a few years ago by setting up an innovation fund. The next series of proposals are about fortifying our first responders, suicide prevention, and also doing better in connecting citizens to the programs that already exist so we can keep them safe during this pandemic. I would highlight specifically a couple of proposals here related to emergency medical services at the bottom of page 14. My healthcare task force views this as a key and first priority to address. Nationally, there are strains on the EMS system, and we need to move quickly to establish how we can ensure that all of our communities have emergency response capabilities. I do believe that this is somewhat of a triage approach while we get more information on the long-term solutions and options for EMS. But this is necessary today to have healthy communities into the future. I also propose a couple of options that are meant to deal with impacts of COVID on care. One for substance abuse in our prisons, second for family medical residency program. These are both one-time in nature and meant to get both programs back on their feet after last year. Now, at the bottom of page 15, I want to highlight that I am asking you to consider making an investment in the RIS system. To extend it, it is eligible for ARPA and for WildLink. Both are key to public safety and the functioning of government. RIS and WildLink have very hefty price tags, as I know you know, totaling about $160 million. So this is only a fraction of what is needed to get those moving to a point where we can really use the benefit to serve citizens and keep them safe. As you can see, I'm also proposing funding more to food security. This is a key issue, and this moves us closer to making informed decisions on how to have that safety net of quality food in Wyoming for those who are most in need. Last is a proposal to set up funding for local entities to apply for ARPA eligible projects. This could include water and sewer projects, but also other ideas that counties, municipalities, and tribes may need. Specifically, some towns receive so little money that they cannot do anything significant, but still have serious needs. I recommend that we craft this program to require a significant match. We need to leverage these funds as much as we possibly can. As I said, this would allow for joint projects for water, sewer, broadband, and also other uses involving mental health projects or in qualified census tracts. This could be affordable housing or ideas like dealing with illegal dump site and cleanup efforts. Ultimately, this proposal puts a major portion of these ARPA funds into savings. On top of the $100 million to the legislative stabilization reserve account that would be earmarked only if Wyoming is successful in attracting very large-scale energy projects, my proposal would set aside more than $150 million in savings using the revenue replacement offsets. This gives us options for future years and prevents us from having to cut budgets when we encounter difficult times as we did last year. These funds are not permanent, and the volatility of our ongoing revenue streams recommends prudence this year as an essential element in any discussion about how best to utilize this windfall. I also believe we may see good ideas in the coming months and even into 2023, so I believe holding a significant amount back of funding is a prudent decision for today. Wyoming has an opportunity to use these funds to power Wyoming's future, not just to cover current costs. It has been a pleasure working with you to consider these opportunities. Today is not a lot different than when we first became a state. It wasn't just a place to run cows that our founders envisioned. It was an entrepreneurial horizon where men and women of vision could craft their future. I am looking forward to seeing what we can do and to hear what our children say about the choices we make. Thank you for your time. I anticipate you probably have a few questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. Appreciate your time and your message this morning. Mr. Co-Chair, I've got a few comments, but if you had anything in particular, do you want me to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Governor, first of all, I just want to express our appreciation for you and the strike forces that you put together. It expended a lot of time and effort to engage those individuals who represented both government and public and private sectors. And so we recognize that and appreciate your time. We appreciate your effort to think both in unconventional and conventional ways about how we use this this transient or this one-time money that we've got to outline a future good uses and future uses that will provide long-term dividends for Wyoming. So we recognize that, and we continue to pledge to you that we're going to work with you to develop on these ideas as we consider your recommendations, and we'll continue to work with you and your staff as we develop a package to take to the floor in the upcoming session. So the JAC is eager to work on this and get to this. We certainly have our constituents as well as, there's, as you know, there's what we've found out is for every $1 billion you have, there's 4 billion places for it to go. So anyway, thank you for the time, Mr. Co-Chair.
Well, I want to say, Rennie, thanks for all the work you put into this. It was fascinating to sit down there and listen to all the ideas and all the concepts. So we all have our dreams for the future and making the world a better place, Governor. And I appreciate how you put this together. It's so we probably were up to 11 last night running through this and having different ideas on what we had, different ideas and different concepts. And but what a pleasure that we have the opportunity to do this and to make Wyoming a better place. And so thank you for your efforts and your work, and we'll do our best to work with you and move Wyoming forward. So thank you.
Morning. Well, thank you, Governor. I know that I think Rennie's you're leaving Rennie behind to do the light work, to clean up. Is that what you're doing? We know you have a busy schedule, and we appreciate your time, and we appreciate your input, and not just on this. We recognize, again, complimented you in private and want to compliment you in public about the way that your team put the budget together. We've been able to go through it very expeditiously. It's very thoughtful. This is the first of a number of letters we're expecting from your office as we kind of work through this and as the session gets closer. And so again, just want to express appreciation of the collaborative nature of the relationship we have with your office and you, and want to continue to work. We're all right for Team Wyoming. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, it is a delight to work with you. Thank you for your vision for the future of Wyoming. I apologize to Senator DeRue, but not to Representative Schwartz for my comments about Teton's fortuitous summer. But so same apology to you. Why can't you say there's a geologic gene pool as well, right? I mean, it's location, location, location. But truly, thank you very much. And I know this will be a long and iterative process. And so we're fully committed to that. Very much appreciate the conversation. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you all. You know the significance of this time. So Doug Samuelson gave me this tie. It is the money cow. Just for anyone's. Yeah. Do you have a herd of those, or why does that work? Morning, Mr. McKay. How are you?
Mr. Chairman, very good. Honored to be here with you, following up on a long year of work together. So thank you.
Yeah, it's been, we just, I know that the lights have burned long and hard in the governor's office for, better part of 2 years now straight. And so anyway, we're interested to receive any additional comments or any additional insights that you want to provide in the governor's plan that you have for us this morning, Randy.
Great. I'll just maybe build on a few things there, Mr. Chairman. So I think, as you heard, the governor is really laying back a large portion of that $1 billion as we move ahead, because there's certainly going to be other ideas that are going to come from the legislature, but also I think that gives us a chance to build on some initial investments with these. So I think that in most instances, really, with what these proposals are, is especially when it's an idea of funding going to a source that we haven't tried before, a grant program, for instance, that the governor cut back what the strike force's recommendation was to say, let's go with the minimum needed, but that is able to move us forward, and not just the minimum amount that leaves us here with only pieces of car instead of a cheap car to keep us going. So I think that just as you look at the proposals, that's certainly a part of it, is that this is meant to start something moving down the track. And I think in conversations through this year that we've had, we'd really need to make some decisions based on as much data as we can. And in some instances, that's a little easier when you can find out what your metric is to measure. And when you're seeking a certain definition of success to measure if you've found it. And in other instances, I think that's going to be harder for us to do, but it's the challenge we want to take on. So
just as a, I know that we've got to work some of this out, but just on a couple of things. So if you just take, just for an example, if you take the first proposal on the revenue replacement grant fund, the $100 million for matching funds. I mean, just, how would you see that? How would you see that program working?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Great question. This one is, as the governor mentioned, the infrastructure bill passed on November 15th, was signed into law. So, we spent from May until November heading down one direction, and we identified things like carbon capture as one of the types of projects that would be necessary for to help Wyoming thrive into the future. And so what investment from ARPA, or the ARPA, because of ARPA, we should make. And Mr. Luthi, who's here as well, can expand on this, but we were talking about the hundreds of millions of dollars that would be required. A CCUS commercial project is $1 billion plus. So what share of one of those in Wyoming's first CCUS facility should get built? What share should Wyoming put forward? 500 million, is that the right number? That's a really hard discussion to try to figure out exactly what that is that will move something like that to commercialization. Then the infrastructure bill passed, and that changed our paradigm. And within the infrastructure bill, it says it will support the building of 2 commercial CCUS facilities on coal-fired power plants, and they must be geographically disparate. So I take that to read, they're either going to choose one in the north and one in the south, or one in the east and one in the west. And so, in either way, we are in some very tight competition. North Dakota has done incredible work to position themselves for that. So how does this work? As we apply for instance, that CCUS facility to land that in Wyoming, if they say we were going to require a match of tens of millions of dollars from the state that is going to receive this, we would just like to set up the criteria that would allow access to these one-time funds, so that we could put in the best application forward. And the applications we hear will open in the first half of 2022. And so that's why we're asking for this urgently, is to have that available to say, we have this pot of money for matching, if we are successful in the application for this. Will we ultimately want to apply, given what could be the strings attached on it? We don't know. But we also know that there could be a very large scale private investment in Wyoming coming that involves this transformation of how energy is produced and used in the United States. And we just want to remain one of the leading producers of that in Wyoming. And so I think, as the governor said, we've got some ideas to start this up. You all have had put some good strings attached to smaller amounts of funding for these energy related projects in the past. And that's helped us. We landed a research CCUS project at the ITC up near Gillette last year. Thanks to the matching funds that you created. I think it was a $20 million number that was available, but we could use that as a match. So we're just dealing on a different scale in this year ahead because of what just came in the infrastructure bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Ms. Vice President.
Rennie, and you brought it up, and I'm glad you did, is because I think you recognize the system, what those metrics are that define success. And so what we have before us today is that kind of a concept proposal is these are the areas that we would like to spend money. And so the question I have is, so we can really drill down on this and understand it better, is so when do we see kind of the fleshed out full-blown proposal on how each one of these programs, because I see a lot of money that we're going to put out to certain programs. How much staff is that going to take? Is it going to require new staff? And then most important, what is the metric for success? How do we define that? How are we going to measure that? And then how are we going to analyze that comparative to other analysis? So let's, so let me give you an example of this discussion that we're having on energy. Have we looked at, rather than doing direct aids and grants, and so what would be that metric? So what's the return on the dollar for that? Is it a 5% return on our investment? Would we be better off investing this in a permanent fund and then doing industrial revenue bonds, arbitrage the difference? In other words, we can do an industrial revenue bond at 4%, but if we invest this in our permanent funds that generates 5 to 7%. Have we looked at those analysis and those metrics to see where are we going to get the bang for our buck? And then how are we going to measure that? And if it's not, what's the probability, or how would we go about then shifting and adjusting if we're not meeting our expectations? So I guess the question is really, I need a lot more details, but when could we expect to see those? And then how do we measure? What's those metrics for each one of these programs that defines success? I really need to understand, how we're going to do that. I like the idea of many of these programs, but I'm concerned that I need more details as to how it's really going to be rolled out. What's the cost of administration versus the metrics that we're going to use to evaluate? Is this really working for the state of Wyoming? Is it accomplishing what we've set out in the framework? Your thoughts?
There's a lot to unpack there, Rennie. Go ahead.
It wasn't a yes or no question.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, great questions. And that is certainly exactly what we've been doing for the last few months. So every one of these projects does have that type of analysis behind it. And so, things keep changing on us. And so, there will be refining some of these as we work with you, but we can get you that for each of these proposals if they require staff and what we kind of envision as the timing of them, the rollout by year, things like that. We can get that for you. We'll go ahead. I know you'll be working hard on these in January, so we'll have a good packet ready for you as you go into that on the specifics. But everyone who proposed a project had to write that up for us. And your question on return on investment, I think is one of the most substantial ones that we are facing, because again, that was what the governor said as he finally looked at these was, I am not, we had some very bold ideas and some very bold proposals in scope and size. And the governor said, I can't support giving you the full amount of this. I am willing to give you an eighth of it in a lot of instances, or, a tenth of it, if you can start something for that. The question we always asked was, if we give you a tenth of what you asked for, and that means you really can't do anything, then there's no point in giving you anything. We need to find, we were calling it the minimum viable investment in these things. So, what is viable to move it ahead, to bring us some data to help us analyze a return on investment. With the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, the metrics we want to look at are jobs added by the programs, where that goes, jobs in Wyoming, what are they paid? What's the graduation rate? Are we getting business startups by people who, there's an entrepreneur program there. So are we getting business startups in Wyoming by graduates of these programs? So those are the metrics there. It gets it's more challenging, and Director Johansson's here. He could talk to you about this. Director Schmidt too. Health and Human Services, it's a little harder to measure if we're going to bring back 5% on that. If we're talking about trying to do suicide prevention, yes, a great metric is, did we see suicide rates go down? Those are the kind of metrics we're going to have to look at. So we want metrics on every one of these. A return on investment, especially as you move into the health and human services space, is not the metric, but we've got to find something to know if it's moving the needle. And both of those directors deal with that every day, because as I listened in a little bit yesterday, I think you were asking that's the same question. How do you figure out if this is having the intended benefit? And these are hard things to figure out. We're not a huge staff, but I would say, we've got a plan in here to try to beef up our team a little bit as we look at investments in the future. So we want to be more data driven as we move forward on this. And so in every instance, we do want to have metrics that we're going to be measuring to be able to try to see if that's there. Some of these aim for long-term investments. The Wildlife Trust, something, that so many people around Wyoming who've been involved in looking at our future have said that's an important investment. The return on that, there's some immediate return on that in terms of jobs created in Wyoming and using Wyoming contractors, and those are really positive. But what we're really talking about is what's the value of, doing juniper removals, and when do you see the return on that? What generation do you see the mule deer population in the Flat Valley come back because of that juniper removal? Or, and what happens if there's a drought at the same time you do the juniper removal, and how do you, deal with those confounding metrics? But that was a long answer to a long question.
Yeah. Thank you. So just maybe a simpler question. So since you brought up the Wildlife Trust Fund, I see my good friend Bob Budd here. Is the concept with that proposal is that would then fully fund what was the original vision for the Wildlife Trust Fund, and after that, then the programs are just self-generated out of the income off the full freight in that fund?
Mr. Chairman, a great question. And the original proposal on that, again, this is a known entity for us that we all have had the Wildlife Trust around long enough that I think we understand what it does and what it doesn't do well enough to make a very substantial investment in it. But the request they made was 100 million, and the governor took it down to 75 because of, targeting being under 500 million in projects. So I would say that as I've talked to Director Budd, his goal was 100 million in there, because then you would have been at the number where if it had been fully funded when it was formed, then it would have generated enough income revenue to have built a corpus. So it still remains shy of where I think Director Budd can talk to you more about this, but in terms of where the demand is, probably you'd still be turning down projects every year that would like to use it, but it would be much, much closer to not ever having to have general fund asks on an annual basis. what the, Director Bud can get you into the more specifics of that, but I think we would still be aiming that someday we get to 200 million at least in that trust, and we'd be at 190 with this.
And then when we went into the, some of the ARPA dollars, I mean, I saw a number of those seem to ring bells on some of the budget proposals we've seen. And some of those are the backfill of some of the stuff that we've already seen in the budget buckets, particularly in the Department of Health. Am I understanding that correctly, that in a relationship?
Mr. Chairman, as you recall, the original strategy was called Survive, Drive, and Thrive. And so there are some proposals in here that still help us get through the survive part of this, that we had some impacts from the budget cuts that if we don't, the request here is to fund some of these things that aren't about long-term investments, but can we stabilize our workforce in health and human services a little bit more with $10 million? It's not going to fix that project or the problem of workforce in that space. But before we go build a new program to train, people who work in mental health, let's at least try to keep the ones we have with a retention bonus now. So definitely, I would say you're exactly right. We've got a few things that are triage, survive focused.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Other questions? Go ahead, Senator Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Ernie. First question is about the housing investment. What do you all see how that taking shape? I mean, we all know, housing in Teton County has been a problem for decades, but now it's North Lincoln, it's all over the state. It's right here in Cheyenne. How do you see that going? It's the same thing, that this is just a starter and maybe to fill in later as it goes. And I see you've got it going to WCDA, and it seems like that's the right place to go, but just talk a little bit about how those discussions went.
And in particular, Rennie, on that question, it seems that, there's been a significant build out of low income housing that because of the federal subsidy, federal grants there. WCDA has a program for first time homeownership that is near zero interest. So where is that dynamic in, where does that fill in? How do you see that filling in? Which I think goes to Senator's question.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. And I am remiss to have gotten this far. Scott Haversland from the WCDA is on the Zoom somewhere in that background. So
we always allow you to phone a friend here.
Yeah. So we've got folks. He's here. Mayor Hall, I believe, is on, and so is Commissioner Willix. Folks who from around the rest of the state who participated in this, and I can't thank them enough, as well as the other directors who are here and who aren't here. I can't thank them all enough for the work they did, because we asked for so much on this. But Mr. Chairman, you kind of hit this perfectly on the housing issue. This is one of these initial investments. Mr. Haversland asked for, I think he's looking at the possibility of a housing trust. A state housing trust has been the idea that they've looked at, because when you just use the federal dollars with the federal strings attached to them, we're pretty limited in what we can do. They target, they're in, appropriately those lowest income housing units and rental units, and that's important. It's part of the mix. But what he's looked at is where are the gaps? What if you just use the federal money? What are we missing? And there's certainly a big part of this that's in the moderate income area, and it's based on area. It's the area median income, if I'm correct, Mr. Haversland, is what you base the definition of moderate income on. And so that's what we'd be looking for, is being able to put more into that level of housing, because that's really what the private market is covering the higher incomes right now, as supplies are limited, and you can make private dollars and investments flow there. So that's why we subsidize especially lower income and moderate income, is to try to get that building. But this could be used in a package of grants to use the tax incentives that exist federally, and the other programs that exist for the lowest income to add into the moderate income. And so it would be a grant cycle that the WCDA would be running, and this is essentially 1 year of funding to see how it works, to be able to come back to you.
So anyway, go ahead and flesh, is it Hubbersland? Mr. Scott, are you
Yes,
there?
it is. Yes.
Yeah, help Rennie. He needs a little bit of help filling this out.
No, and I think he kind of touched on the high points, and you did too, Senator and members of the committee. The federal dollars that we get cover up to the 80% of area median income. So what we're looking at here is trying to fill that gap, that 80 to 120% of area median income that aren't covered by the federal dollars, or those in those lower area income that we don't have enough federal subsidy to fill in. So the 22.6 million a year is just for the first year of that. And hopefully we can meet a lot of the need that's out there. We do a qualified annual plan for allocating our federal dollars, and what this 22.5 million could fit right in with that for that moderate income individuals to help, rental housing or single family home ownership type of housing to cover some of those costs and start building out that stock. It's really, we've got a shortage of new stock around the state, and if we could start adding to that, then I think that would help.
So, I mean, when you talk about the housing grant fund, but it's in the concepts of a housing trust, I mean, ultimately, what that brings to my mind, I don't quite understand the use of those two terms, grant and then this concept of a trust, because if it's a trust, there would be some common revolving nature of it that ultimately it at some point it regenerates, and as other income or other key comes through, you start this investment that starts a cycle that generates, it starts to perpetuate upon itself. So helps understand, because I don't, when you use the word grant, and usually in the JAC, that doesn't equate to any kind of revolving nature of any kind of expenditure.
I'll turn this over to Mr. Hoversland in a second here, but that's, Mr. Chairman, that's very astute observation. If we use ARPA, and this is proposed to be ARPA eligible, these funds, these 22.6, we could do revolving until the end of the lifetime of ARPA. So you'd have to do essentially some sort of forgivable loan that would be forgivable by the end of 26. If we use general fund dollars, we'd move into something like you're talking about. And that's the idea of a trust, is because then you'd be doing loans. But Mr. Hoversland, you were just in Washington, D.C. and heard a lot about this.
Yes, and Mr.
Scott, go ahead. It's easier to say Scott than Hubbersland.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, that is part of it with the ARPA funds. It's unclear with the Treasury right now to make loans. Those loans will have to be forgivable by the end of 2026, as we understand it right now. That was some of the discussions we had earlier in this week when we were in DC, and I was meeting with members of other executive directors from around the country. A lot of them are looking at doing, ARPA funds, but also making those loans forgivable after that period ending in 2026. If we were able to have it from general funds, we would be able to make those loans out there, for 25, 30 years, whatever works in the cash flows for those projects, earn interest on those loans, and then revolve that, have a trust fund that actually revolves. That money would come back. It would have a return on investments because we would have an interest rate associated to those loans that are out there.
Thank you. Senator Rudy, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, and I'm gratified to hear that, Director, because that's the federal funds and the challenges that are attached to that, and the median income levels that are attached to that generally don't help my constituents very much. And so that's why I was looking for and hoping to see that we could maybe put together some general fund dollars that could go to that as well, because for that very same reason, because same thing, and it's not just our county, it's North Lincoln County as well. And rental housing is a big part of that as well in both places that our constituents are going to be looking for. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. So other questions? Go ahead, Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rennie, on page 6 of the governor's handout, the title of that spreadsheet says proposals eligible for revenue replacement or general funds. And then I drop over to page 10, and that spreadsheet title is proposals likely eligible for ARPA funds. They total $486 million, those two spreadsheets. Could you help us understand the governor's priority? Is he suggesting all of these two spreadsheets have equal priority in his mind? Or how do these two spreadsheets fit into each other?
Go ahead, Randy.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Great question. So, certainly there is a different dynamic between ARPA dollars. We have to spend the ARPA dollars it has to be obligated by the end of 2024 and spent by the end of 2026. And so the proposals eligible for ARPA, which our new contractor that's just been in place now for about 10 days is going to be able to help us do that first pass on eligibility for all of these to see if we might have missed something that might have made something on the first table eligible for ARPA that we didn't see, and if we're wrong, a housing program, for instance, then we'd come back to you in January with an update and say, here's the analysis of these proposals. We do believe they're all ARPA eligible, or they would only be ARPA eligible under these circumstances. So to Senator Hicks's question about metrics and more details, we'll continue to work with you on that through January. So as we look at that, there's certainly I think we need to think of ARPA dollars slightly differently than we think of the dollars that are revenue replacement, because the revenue replacement is allowing us to cover other government expenses that's freeing up general fund dollars. And that creates flexibility for the state as we move forward. And I think that was a priority of all of ours, the executive and the legislatures we heard as this came into existence. So, but does that mean we shouldn't take advantage with some one-time investments? Certainly that is the case. So I would say the governor is not ranking these in order at all. We tried to group these a little bit more by topic rather than priority. If you want the question of what is the highest priority on this list, that would be something I need to come back to you with and say to the governor. Representative Simpson said you can only have 50 million. What is it, Governor? That question would be some dialogue we could get into with you if you want to go through this. If that's the feedback from today that this is too high, then we'll be looking at that more closely.
Thank you,
Any follow-up
Mr.
there?
Chairman. I
Excuse
think
me,
it's
Representative
important for us to know what the governor's thinking. What are his top priorities, and where can we go with the monies available? I think that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Stitt.
Mr. Chairman, Rennie, with respect to the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, that seems like that could really be a great program if it's done right. One of the questions I think that many of us have is that we've already got $27 million the governor has already essentially taken to get the first year going. Then this would, 55 million would provide 2 more years. These are one-time funds. For this program to work, of course, the university's got to hire human beings, people, whether that's a professor or whether that's someone out in the community colleges whose job it is to make a makerspace actually function, for example. So question is, what are the governor's ideas about year 4 and 5 and 6? What do you do? Do you just say, gosh, that was fun and we fire these people, or what do you do for a continuing funding mechanism?
Mr. Chairman, great questions. And that is why I think you're seeing a different proposal in the background of this for this part of WIP versus the first year investment. That 27 million went out, and that went to specific programs. Some went to Wyoming Works. Some is going to an entrepreneurship program to start up those 307 incubators. Those were targeted and said, yes, go forward with that program. The governor wants to see how those unfold in the next couple of months and start to have a little bit better feedback from the ground, from institutions of higher education, from the Business Council, from Workforce Services about, okay, were those the right investments? Do we keep going with those? So that's why this is not to propose to say we'd like to start these 4 programs or expand these programs at higher education or workforce services. It is, and we put some money aside that we can further discuss what is the best use of these funds to maximize return. And I think maybe you heard the governor say that too. One of his biggest questions is clarify for me what your path is to making this self-sustaining. And, you know, I really appreciate what I've heard from Dr. Seidel and Dr. Caldwell about the future of higher education, that they understand soft money and grants. You know, this is when you're talking to the private sector and looking at private donations to higher education, or you're
not that I'm opposed to wildlife crossings, but I'm wondering how you prioritize the various efforts you were pursuing.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, I'm going to take that question two different ways, if I may, and answer them both ways. The first is within highway crossings and migration alone, we follow the lead of the Governor's Migration Task Force, which identified 3 designated routes in the state. Those would be the top priority. On top of that, the Game and Fish Department they're far ahead of anybody else in the country on what research has been done. So there's a prioritized list of what needs to happen next. And if you look at that, Dry Piney was number 1, KC to Buffalo is number 2. The next is Halleck Ridge on I-80, which is probably about a $40 million bill. There's another crossing on I-80. They have that list prioritized, and we'll follow that list. I think the other context you're asking is where does highway crossings and migration fit into the total portfolio of what the board does? I would say that right now, and probably historically, there is no prioritized list that would say, okay, if you've got a highway crossing project, we rate it higher than a river restoration project. Every project that comes before the board is evaluated on its merits and its need and its impact biologically, ecologically, and economically. So a highway project is going to compete directly with a river restoration, with a wetland creation, with a sage grouse project. And at the end of the day, when you get down to where you have to choose, the board will do that based on merit. So I hope that I answered the question the way you intended.
Follow up?
Yes, you did. I guess then the question becomes specifically related to the ARPA funding. You know, what's the best use of it to enable you to pursue those various aims?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, I think the proposal that the governor has given you is very well thought out in that it puts $10 million in matching funds immediately available. That's critical as we look at the immediacy of the infrastructure package. The other portion that goes into the corpus of the trust gets us closer to where we need to be as far as generating revenue each year to do the projects that the normal demand that we have. Now, if we get another big highway project, let's say it's a $20 million and we need to generate $4 million, the private sector has stepped up in this state in spades. They have been amazing. They've gone out and raised over $1 million, almost $2 million in private money to complete Dry Piney and to complete KC to Buffalo. I think they are committed and dedicated. No, I don't think, I know they are, to doing that as we can moving forward. So we end up being the accumulator for a lot of different entities. We're happy to do that, and I think it's worked well, and I think that we have a bright future in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Budd, when I was served on that committee, my memory recalls that there were times that you expressed frustration when we would have projects coming forth, and one of the participating stakeholders was one of the federal agencies that connected by the Department of Ag, Department of the Interior, really because of bureaucracy at the federal level. So I'm just curious, when you had the opportunity to meet those representatives last week, they're talking about how to expedite the use of those funds that are in this next project. Did you have a chance to have some of that conversation, and did they give you any sense of relief on past challenges associated with working with them?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's a tremendous question, and we spent a lot of time on that. What are the barriers? And as an example, I'll give you a couple examples that we specifically highlighted. Spent a long time trying to getting a chemical called indaziflam permitted to use on federal lands. You can use indaziflam. This is for cheatgrass, vempnata, medusa head, invasive annual grasses. It's called Rejuvra. Some of you have heard about it. So the Forest Service approved it for use on Forest Service lands, and Fish and Wildlife Service approved it for use on refuges. BLM did not approve it for use on BLM lands. So you're treating private, you're treating state, you're treating forests, you're treating wildlife refuges and not the BLM. It's not a good process. So the Forest Service was actually quite pleased that they were included in the good guy list until we pointed out that they had a ban on using aerial application with helicopters. So you got, those are the kind of things that we've pointed out, and the suggestions that have been made, they are already moving up on getting Dazaflam, the NEPA done, and get it to where we can use it on BLM lands. That they left here with that one on their plate. The other pieces that we've talked about are programmatic NEPA. Let's take migration corridors and say, could we do programmatically NEPA that says you can use Indaziflam to treat invasive annual grasses in a designated migration corridor? That would be a huge step for us, because we then wouldn't have to go every application and go through an EA or an EIS process. So those are some of the examples of things that we did talk about. The next steps for us on this, we're having a cabinet meeting this afternoon with all of the appropriate agencies to end up with our punch list, which we will deliver back to DC. They're going to issue an interim report in February. We intend to have our list completely to them by the first week in January, so that they know exactly where we're going. I think that's a plus as well. And then we will probably go back to DC in a month or so and sit down with those people and walk through that.
And then follow up, Mr. Chairman,
As you visited with our federal partners on these projects, as you was going around this last week, did they share with you or give you any indication on perhaps how the state of Wyoming sets compared to other states in similar type of efforts?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, they did, and let's just say we're in a very good place.
Go ahead, Representative Kinnear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Director Bud, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So you mentioned that Buffalo, there's Buffalo KC, and I drive that way quite a bit. Could you tell me specifically what?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kinner, yes, there's a stretch of highway between KC and Buffalo that has some of the highest collision rates in the state. And you know it, you drive it. So you know what the deer and antelope are like. What that project would do, there are a number of places along there where you have a creek, small creek that crosses underneath. The underpass where it goes, or the bridges are wide enough for animals to pass. There are other box culverts that they can use. There are some retrofits that might be possible. The problem is that the right of way is fenced with a 3 or 4 wire fence. So they can get onto that right of way, and we all have seen it in the fall when that stays green because the snow melts off and it hasn't frozen yet. The native rangelands aren't. That's a magnet. So building appropriate fencing that will funnel those animals underneath the interstate to where they're not out on the road surface is what that project is. It's about $5 million worth of fencing for that stretch between KC and Buffalo. That's fully funded now. Half that came from private sources. So that's one that is fairly straightforward. Senator Hicks can tell you exactly how it works. His place down in the Little Snake River Valley, we did that one, started I think in 2008 with the first underpass. There are now 2. If you get a chance to see it, you'll see how that fencing comes in, funnels them through, works very, very effectively. And it's something that is relatively low cost if you compare it, say, with an overpass. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Other questions? All right. Any other question for Director Bud on his budget? Yes, go ahead.
Just a comment. Pleasure of serving on the committee that approves these funding projects. Director Bud and his zeal and his enthusiasm for what he does is replicated throughout his work, and the board is terrific at putting together and prioritizing those projects. And I'm always gratified when we get the list out and it comes back and everyone seems to come in on time, on budget, exactly as proposed, exactly as laid out. And it's a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
Anyone else like to compliment Director Bud? Go ahead. I can't. So just so you know, Bob Bud and I have been we're good friends in high school and been friends since. So I have to rib him once in a while. So it's the way it works.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your budget book, in the narrative part of it, it discusses that projects over 200,000 are forwarded to the select committee. Assuming that is the legislative select committee, is that what you're referring to with that select committee?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, it is the select committee, legislative committee, and we will be forwarding those to them. Probably get that bill done here in the next week or 10 days. So, and we do have, I think, 5 this year. They're really impressive. We've got Forest Health. We've got continuation of the project on South Pass, Representative Larson. So very, very good projects.
Bob, do we have any data on like down in Bags, the place where we've installed these crossings, wildlife crossings? Do we? I'm assuming that we've got data on the collisions, and I mean, are we seeing a significant decrease on those? I'm assuming we are, but I don't recall seeing any.
Mr. Chairman, we do have data. If I could, I would defer to Vice Chairman Hicks. He's been on top of that one from day one.
Thank you.
Work, but I'm not used to specific, just as an example, when we before we started the first crossing in Bags that winter of 07-08, we had 186 collisions in about a 5-mile reach, which became very concerning, and particularly for a lot of the companies and people that work out there, and the property damage and the potential loss. And so the initial deer tunnel and fencing went in with about 5 miles of fencing and deer tunnel. And then with the department, Game and Fish Department and WIDOT, they installed cameras and actually photographed every animal that went through that tunnel. And so the winter of 2008 and 9, after that was constructed, they documented over 6,000 mule deer crossing through that one tunnel. We had a severe winter, so there was a large migration and stuff. But if you think about those 6,000 deer that went under that tunnel instead of across that highway, we still had some highway mortality because they come around, but I think it was 12. So under similar conditions, we went from 186 collisions with primarily deer, some antelope, and a couple of elk, to a dozen within a year's period of time under similar conditions. So just the property damage alone justified the cost of the project.
Thank you for that information.
And Mr. Chairman, WIDOT does maintain those records in these areas that have been identified as primary crossing, need of fencing, crossing, underpasses, whatever. And the others, if you want the data, I can get it for you. But Nugget Canyon had the same kind of results. The overpasses at Trappers Point, all of those had similar dramatic reductions in collision.
Well, obviously, I mean, so if assuming that your projects rarely have any trouble making it to the floors. We look at the ARPA funding and other things like that. Those types of things, particularly the crossing, we're going to need that data. If those things make the cut and get out to the floor, we'll need that data. So the people, again, getting metrics, and we always appreciate your report. When your reports come out on your projects, one of the metrics I always look at is the amount of how you've leveraged those dollars and the amount of stakeholders that are involved in those projects. Significant metric. Obviously, when you find that kind of involvement from that many people, it's an issue that reflects well, and obviously there's a significant bang for the buck. So we appreciate your work, Dr. Bud. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to seeing your project book on the floor, working on the bill.
We'll have it to you.
Thank you. All right. Next up is what time we got? You want to stretch your legs? You want to get into this? Let's go ahead and start. Director Cooley, welcome. Good morning, Director. Go ahead. We're glad to have you here today. Welcome. We're ready to go through your budget. You've been over a little bit. We're mostly looking, the budget's the way that the governor and the budget department directed these. We recognize that these are pretty flat budgets, very, very, essentially almost exact same budgets that were here before. So we're mostly concentrating on the exception requests, but what we have been doing is just simply entertain some open remarks from you. And then we've kind of been going through unit by unit, but just very, very quickly, particularly in just highlighting on the exception requests. And then if we have questions, we have not been shy about asking them. So
very good.
Director, welcome, and go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Robin Cooley. I am the Director of Wyoming Workforce Development Service, Wyoming Workforce Development, and it's a pleasure to be here today with you. With your permission, I'll start with some introductions of this incredible team that I've got here with me. Go through some agency successes and challenges, and then we'll dig right into the budget. First introductions, I've got here with me Deputy Director Liz Gagan into the table. Liz and I have worked together for a number of years. We started out in the Attorney General's office together, had some interactions after that for a while, and she's back with me, and I am very pleased to have her as my deputy. She's been helping me with all things COVID for the last 22 months, as well as working on HR and our personnel issues. At times, she double and triple fills positions if we have people that are out of the office. So I thank her for that extra work. She's also oversees the medical commission, but also there's a contracts unit that we put together that you'll hear a little bit about later in our discussion on this exception budget. We decided with an agency this size, we needed to really funnel our contracts into one area, into one unit. So we were keeping better track of them, better track of the amendments we needed, and better track of RFP issues that we needed to address. Next to me is our new CFO, Robin Martin. Ms. Martin joined the team as our CFO in early October as an internal promotion within the office. She's been in the office about 3.5 years. She was the protege of our last CFO, Kristen Burkhart, who left us to really pursue a passion of hers in another area. And we hated to see her go, but she trained up Ms. Martin very well, and she stepped in and taken over the reins and with the fiscal team and has been doing a very excellent job for us. So thank you, CFO Martin. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Administrator Jason Wolf. He's our Workforce Standards Administrator. You'll recognize the name and I hope the face. He is all things workers' compensation. So when you have those types of questions, please reach out to him, as well as and workers' compensation, as well as other state industry safety programs that we've got in our agency. As well, he's oversees our OSHA state program, which has also been front and center for him these past several months, and has been doing a very good job interacting with that team and working around the federal regulations that we've all been grating our teeth over. As well, he in his division is the Labor Standards Unit, which is our wage and hour claims that really handle the EEOC claims, the wage and hour claims, and some of those are some of the vaccine mandate claims that you've been hearing about. DDS is also in his unit, and he oversees that with an individual there. Our Workforce Service Programs Administrator, Holly McCamey-Simone, on the end there. Miss McCamey-Simone is able to speak to you about all things unemployment insurance. So that's been a hot topic, and if you have any questions for her, she's the one to reach out to. As well, she's in our employment training unit, overseeing 20 workforce centers across the state, which is a difficult task, to be sure. with a team across the state, working on all things reemployment, and actually filling in for, and helping out with UI when we had some closures and such an increase in UI claims. She also oversees our workforce development training fund system, which I hope you've been hearing a lot about. It's our training system, training fund grant program out there where we're providing internships and training dollars to businesses to really help upskill and increase the abilities of their existing workforce, as well as bring interns in to get familiar with their businesses. And apprenticeships, I should say. She also oversees our vocational rehabilitation unit. Next is Administrator Haley McKee. She is our administrator over our policy research and communication division. And in the past 22 months, that has been an absolutely incredible division within our office. I know I hope you've all been receiving our elected official newsletter on a weekly basis since March, since able to you. And if there's anything additional you'd like to see in that, please let us know. They've also put on numerous town halls to educate the public about unemployment, filing for unemployment. If you've got a problem with unemployment, so all things reemployment, it's just, they've been an incredible resource to us. Also submitting the weekly roundup out to our teams to keep our teams updated on what's going on in the office, and social media contacts as well. They're also our legislative contact and report unit. We also have a state occupational epidemiologist in that unit. Research and planning is in the unit, and they do all data research. And the Trends magazine that comes out that provides labor updates and particular research projects around some of those issues as well. So we'll be looking for that. And they also have the Workforce Development Council liaison there. Another individual that I always forget to mention, but she's last but not least, is our state mine inspector, Heather Krupa. She's located out of Rock Springs. She is a member of our administration team and does a fantastic job with mine inspections around the state. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to start with some successes.
Sure, and just let me, I didn't say this before, but just let me express again appreciation for the hard work of your department over the last 2 years. It's been an incredible road. I mean, a year ago, 18 months ago, we were right in the middle of this thing, $500 million in unemployment benefits distributed. This workplace it's just been a workplace whirlwind for a long time. It looks like it's going to continue for a while, but we recognize that there've been a lot of hours, a lot of extra effort, and a lot of responsibility has centered in the Department of Workforce Services, and there's a burden that's going to be borne for a while as we work our way through this and start to climb out of it, and we are recognizing severe disruptions in the workforce that are going to ripple for years to come. While we'll see how this all settles out, but we appreciate the role that you've played and the work that you've done and the role that you'll continue to play as we move forward, particularly in the next couple of years. You're going to be front and center of a lot of efforts, both locally and federally. So anyway, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead, Representative Larson.
If you'd allow me to tag onto that just a little bit, Director Cooley, I don't think I'm unique in this, but your agency's response back to us as legislators as we call and as you've had to sort out a myriad of things, sometimes things got a little bumpy and our constituents call us, and when we call you, you've just been very responsive. As recent as yesterday, Jason, we have a conversation and your agency's just responded very well, and that's really appreciated. And I've yet to have an issue that wasn't resolved what I considered a timely matter. And so with all that you have doing your response back to us as we try to fulfill our responsibilities has been excellent, and we appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for that. And I want to thank this team in front of you. I couldn't have a better team. Every ask that's been made of them, they've rose to the challenge, and they're an incredible group of people, and I'm very thankful and proud to be working with them. So I wanted to let them know that in public.
And now it's recorded on YouTube forever.
There you go. Well, the last 22 months have certainly brought us a lot of challenges, but with those challenges have come some opportunities for successes, and we've had a lot of them. We've had the glitches, but we've had a lot of successes. And what I'd like to start out with is talking about those successes around the goals of our office. And our overarching goals in the office are establishing a trained workforce and connecting job seekers with job opportunities, improving workplace health and safety for workers, and supporting Wyoming employers and workers. So starting with that first goal, establishing that trained workforce and connecting job seekers to job opportunities, I'd like to mention the Business Training and Support Fund that implements the Workforce Development Training Fund. We've got funds in that where we can provide business training grants, pre-hire economic development grants, pre-obligation grants, apprenticeship grants, and internship grants. The internship grant program was launched during COVID, so it got off to a little bit of a rocky start, but that thing is going great guns now. We've got tremendous opportunities in all kinds of industries around the state with interns working through those programs. And I think it's been a real benefit to the state, and we're continuing to increase that opportunity. Earlier, we were given some CARES Act funds to also provide some targeted internship opportunities with with the CARES Act fund, and that as well was a benefit to our communities and our businesses around the state. An agency you maybe don't hear a lot about is vocational rehabilitation, and I do want to mention a couple successes from entities within the agency you don't hear much about, just to let you know the breadth of the services provided in our agency. Vocational rehabilitation, their primary mission is the employment, reemployment, and vocational training of individuals with disabilities who have significant impediment to employment. Last year, our Voc Rehab team served 4,308 people. They were able to, 447 cases were successfully placed in competitive integrated employment at an average hourly rate of $13.67. Also within vocational rehabilitation, they work to expand youth-centered apprenticeship programs in non-traditional occupations. They also continued their efforts to expand pre-employment transition service programs by collaborating with the University of Wyoming, community colleges, and BOCES to develop innovation workshops for non-traditional occupations in 7 Wyoming communities. So that's something that you really don't hear about, is that work and that interaction and partnership between vocational rehabilitation and community colleges. And I think it's extensive and it's developing. Also in this area, another success was our policy research and communication team. As I mentioned earlier, communication for the last 22 months has been critical, with weekly newsletters to our teams around the state in what we call the Roundup, highlighting DWS events, and providing kudos to some of our staffing, the elected official newsletter. We've also done monthly DWS Zoom meetings with the leadership team just to get the word out about and communicate more with our teams. Town halls that we've had, both our internal and with other agencies. And they also put on first ever all virtual Workforce and Safety Summit meeting. We're also having our second annual office-wide meeting where it's a virtual meeting where we have half of the team show up one day, half of the team show up the other day, so we can keep all of our services going out to our communities. So those have been some real successes there. On the second goal, improving workplace health and safety for workers, our Wyoming Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or our state OSHA plan folks, completed 178 inspections 5 investigations for workplace fatalities, 212 documented rule violations, $17,000 issued or $719,000 issued in initial penalties, collecting over $400,000 in penalties and fines, which money goes into the school foundation fund, I'd add. The State Mine Inspector's Office, I wanted to make sure again to mention them. They've conducted a total of 1,377 health and safety inspections around the state, but also provided training to our miners with electrical mine foreman certification review, surface coal, shot fire recertification, accident investigation and prevention, first aid and CPR, and those are just a few of them. The Wyoming Mining Council was responsible for the certification of 91 mine foremen and 23 mine examiners. And the inspector's office was responsible for certifying 39 contractors to perform workplace examinations at surface coal mines for contractor work areas. So the work effort in providing those opportunities for our miners around the state is ongoing. Another entity or part of the office that I don't think ever hear about is the state occupational epidemiologist. We've got one state occupational epidemiologist in the state. She works in our office and works very closely with the Department of Health, Public Health there. She had major accomplishments in 2021, including extensive work with our leadership, industry partners, and public health to coordinate the COVID response efforts, both internally with state agencies as well as externally. But I also wanted to note that she created a safety success story that was titled Safety Shoutouts for Truck Drivers in Wyoming, because that's one of the more difficult workplace safety areas in our state, of course. That story described a partnership between the Department of Workforce Services, the Wyoming Department of Transportation, and the Wyoming Trucking Association that resulted in annual messaging campaign to improve trucker safety in the state. The report received national attention by the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists and the Transportation Nation Network. I thought that was pretty remarkable for one state epidemiologist to get that kind of national recognition. So our third goal, supporting Wyoming employers and workers. I want to mention the Labor Standards and Business Consultant Unit. This is the labor standards unit that takes in the wage claims, wage and hour claims, and also the EEOC discrimination complaints. They've moved to moving to an all digital office, which is a big accomplishment for them. But in state fiscal year 2021, they received 163 claims for employment discrimination claims, with 104 total charges closed. Wage and Hour had 366 total claims open, with 440 total claims closed. Our resident contract certification program, which I think you hear every now and again with some issues around the state, certified 1,600 resident contractors and conducted 974 on-site inspections to determine contractors' Wyoming residency status. Our business consultant unit, which is our labor preference unit, conducted 974 labor preference inspections, issued 6 citations, resolved 54 issues, and received over $15,000 in a labor preference violation. You know all about our unemployment insurance benefits and what they've done for the past year, but just some highlights. They launched 5 new federal UI pandemic programs over the span of maybe 5-6 months, where one of those in a general regular year, one of those would take a full year just to test, to program, to test, and to implement. That's a really remarkable thing that they did there, handling a 1,300% increase in UI claims in the early months of the pandemic, paying out, as you indicated, over $500,000 into our communities in UI funds. Pretty critical when you get some of those phone calls from individuals across the state that are panicking. They've never filed an unemployment claim ever. They have real issues with it. It's a convoluted and complex system. And if you don't do it right the first time, you get into a system that's a very difficult system, and it's difficult to back out of that and make it right. So working with those individuals was difficult. And I also want to call out our 20 workforce centers around the state that are the only centers in the entire country that stayed open and available to assist with people in-house assisting those individuals. So, because they didn't have libraries to go into, they don't have internet to use to get onto their own computers. So the places they would go would be the workforce centers, where they got incredible assistance from our workforce center staff in order to fill the worker or the unemployment benefit claims out. So just an entire agency-wide effort to step up where the need was at the particular time. I also will just briefly touch on fraud, and Ms. McCamey Simone has more information if you want to go there. Our fraud team was incredible just from the get-go in manually catching, red flagging and catching the fraud coming in. We were able to stop a great deal of that fraud. Some did go out, but we had panic calls again from your constituents about getting an unemployment letter from us for benefits, and they never filed a claim. So we were taking care of those for all of those individuals as well. And I think for the most part, we got them shut down, and we didn't pay out a whole lot in that. Recognize that we're still going through that process because our appeals unit saw a 430% increase in appeals, because once you file a claim, if it's denied, you get to go to an adjudicator that's in-house, have another look at it. If it's denied there, you then get to go to the UI Commission, which is a commission of 3 volunteer individuals from around the state that in a general year, I'd guess they'd maybe come together for maybe up to 10 hearings, UI hearings. They were there full day hearing up to 30 and more UI appeals, and the work they did was absolutely remarkable for a volunteer commission to do that work and keep up with it and work for the Wyoming citizens. Workers' compensation claims, not only dealing with over 10,000 injuries across Wyoming, but also dealing with the COVID presumption that this legislature put into place, and some of the COVID claims coming in. And Mr. Administrator Wolf does have additional information on that with the numbers if you're interested with that. I also want to mention disability determination services. Don't hear a lot about that. They had a number of claims last year, served 3,500 people in fiscal year 2021, and are looking about those same numbers for this next year. Moving into challenges, though, these successes did come with challenges, of course. This is an agency that has no real downtime in a regular year. If there's a boom, we're trying to get people into jobs and helping employers fill jobs. If there's a bust, we're trying to help people get unemployment benefits and helping them get upskilled. But as it turns out, we're extremely busy during pandemics as well. What we saw was a dramatic increase in the workloads, which caused an incredible ripple effect throughout our entire agency. People stepped up. We had people from different agencies or units within the office that stepped into a UI role that maybe they had some familiarity with to help out in that area. We had labor standards again. You know, there wasn't a single area in our office that didn't see an increased need and an increased workload. But also, we saw the increased scrutiny just recently in OSHA and dealing with those emergency temporary standards issued by federal OSHA and how we were going to deal with that. And thank you to the Wyoming OSHA Commission for working so closely with us on that as well. I will have to end here with the challenges by indicating and telling you something that I'm sure that you already know. Our teams are weary. Our teams are exhausted. We just had a discussion yesterday about it, and we are seeing an exodus from the office that only even recently, as today, we are having to close workforce centers around the state because we don't have staffing. So what we're already seeing is the reduction in excellent needed services around the state because of staffing issues and because we don't have enough people in the other areas to drive to fill in for these other areas because we've got such a need for employees to fill some of those positions. There's a sense of just waiting for the next shoe to drop. What's going to be the next federal regulation, the next program that we need to put up overnight? The next issue that one part of our agency is going to have to deal with. It's a constant weight, and it's a pressure, and it's a stress that I feel across the agency. I'm incredibly proud of this agency. They met the challenges and the needs across the state to provide services to citizens, and it was incredible to see. There wasn't a single person that didn't step up. And they're incredible, and I'm proud of them. I truly hope that this legislature is able to recognize that, to recognize what they did for the citizens in this state, and to recognize the need to help them out by approving the governor's compensation pay plan for our state employees. With that general introduction, and I apologize for getting emotional. It's gotten emotional at times in our agency this year. With that, I will turn it over to our CFO, Robin Martin, and we'll start walking through our budget exceptions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we, I'm looking at, yeah, so we've been sitting here since 8, so we need to take a short break, and let's resume at 3:15. And excuse me, how about 10:15? Yeah. Just have a long break. We'll be back in 15 minutes, so we'll come back at 10:15. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are back in order, and let's go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, and the rest of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present our budget and exception requests today. As Director Cooley indicated, my name is Robin Martin, and I'm the new CFO at the Department of Workforce Services. Our agency consists of 6 budget divisions, and we have 10 exception requests for your consideration today. We operate with a biennial budget of approximately $199 million. Really?
Yep, and
Okay.
if it doesn't echo, it's not working.
Okay, got it.
There you go.
We operate with a biennial budget of just under $200 million and 559 employees. Our budget is made up of 9% general funds, 50% federal funding, and 41% other funds. On page 15, you'll find our exception request priorities table, and we've provided you with a handout of the exception requests that lists page numbers on the right-hand side for you to follow along. You will see that we have a total of just over $11 million in exception requests with a net decrease in general funds. You may recall in previous biennium presentations, we discussed several cleanup initiatives. We do have approximately 20 position moves this biennium, and of those, about half are corrections to unit or funding, in part from our supplemental budget cut cleanup. A few of these position moves are a result of an effort to better utilize our resources where they were needed most. We carefully review vacant positions to determine if there's a greater need in another part of the agency.
So we're looking at page 17, right?
15.
Okay, I'm already on 17. Keep going.
Thank you. We also have a few technology requests, which we have as mission critical for our agency. As you indicated earlier, Mr. Chairman, you would like us to go through fairly quickly for the exception request, so I will do so.
Mr. Chairman,
So go ahead, Kevin.
before we leave page 15 and 16, I would like to just state in a discussion about their position moves, Workforce Services is a great example of following the process and the expectations, cross-divisional work, exception requests, et cetera, to the amount of $876,044, which can be found on page 16. They balanced their positions and they cleaned up B11s, and it's a pleasure, an absolute pleasure to work with the Department of Workforce Services. Their budget is 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and it's greatly appreciated.
That sounds like a challenge, but thank you. We appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, that is a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Accepted. Well, which takes me to page 17, which is your position change. And so as we look at that, page 17, we're going to see as we go through we have the units down the left-hand side, we're going to see these position changes. So when we get down to the end, it's pretty much a net to zero, except for the fact that apparently you've moved some from general fund and found a way that they can be paid with federal fund. Is that
Correct.
I understand that correctly?
Correct.
Other than that, it's basically a net zero change.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Questions? All right, continue.
Okay, with that, Mr. Chairman, we will turn to page 20. This is our first unit. This is Office of the Director, 0101. The first position adjustment is started on page 19. This is an efficiency move from unit 0201 to 0101 general funds.
Right.
On the bottom of page 20, this is a supplemental budget cut correction, moving from 0101 general funds to 0150 federal funds.
Okay.
On the next page, priority 3 position adjustment. This is an efficiency move from 0101 general funds to 0501 other funds.
Okay.
On page 22, this is the TRP request for this unit.
And TRP is?
Technology replacement, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you.
On the bottom of page 22 into page 23 is our HR consolidation, which moves 5 generally funded positions out of this unit.
Okay, that, for that point, we'll have a question from Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. HR consolidation has been something that's occurred in every agency. And so the couple overarching questions, are these folks still physically located within your office? And that's followed by, how has the transition gone? Are you still receiving the services you need in a timely manner? What hiccups, road bumps have you seen? What successes? Just a quick general discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Pull it closer. You don't
Mr.
have to-
Chairman,
Pull it closer. There you go.
okay. Representative Walters. The HR consolidation has gone fairly well. We have good communication with the HR staff assigned to Department of Workforce Services. And we do have HR personnel in our Cheyenne office and in our Casper office as well, which we appreciate and of course helps. The perhaps drawback that we've had is prior to the consolidation, we had a level 13 HR and we had a level 12 HR. And after the consolidation, we are now sharing one level 12 with the Department of Work or the Department of Family Services, as well as the Oil and Gas Commission. So when we have bigger HR issues where we need to do an investigation or administer some discipline, there just simply isn't enough HR services for us, but that could probably be easily remedied.
Okay, and thank you. And please, obviously, you'll let the H&R know. You obviously, Kevin's here, so they know. But you know, as we make this move, you know, ultimately there should be additional resources because you have a broader pool to pull from. So, but if that's not working that way, you please sound the alarm and let the right folks know, and necessarily let us know. Okay, we want to see this work, and ultimately it should work better. You should have more resources because now you have the ability to share across and find expertise that you may not have had access to before. So you should, at the end of the day, you should be having access to more expertise, not less. So, you know, it'll take a while for it to work so well out, but, you know, please keep us informed, please.
Mr. Chairman, one additional comment, if I may. I think the purpose of this was maybe to, across the board, provide some consistency. I think that is happening, and I think that's an excellent goal. But we're in that position where we're matching the workload with the employees' availability, and that's been the difficulty. But I think we've had several meetings, and HRD has been very receptive to those meetings, and I think we're starting to work toward that.
Yeah, you guys know all about rollouts and that they always go without a bump.
Yeah.
So yeah, right.
No problem.
Oh wait, no, it doesn't work that way. So yeah, anyway, thank you. Okay, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Turning to page 27, our next unit is 0110. This is our Policy Research and Communications unit. There are 2 exception requests for this unit. The first is on page 28. This is our priority number 5, Wyoming Council for Women. At the direction of the legislature, this program is being moved from the Wyoming Business Council to Workforce Services.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
On
you.
the next page, 29, is our technology.
Yes, go ahead, Representative Schwartz. I thought there'd be a question on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I just want to ask about how that transition is going.
I'm going to have, if I may, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman, I'm going to
absolutely.
have Ms. McKee come up and respond to that. Thank
Sure.
you. We've got everybody here, and we're going to give them a chance.
All right. Your troops aren't just for show, they can fight. That's right. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, my name is Haley McKee. I'm the Administrator for Policy, Research, and Communications at Workforce Services. And we have the pleasure of working with the Wyoming Council for Women now. It is a transition, and we have staff that are dedicated to working with this group who are supporting the women of Wyoming. And, I think, like I mentioned, it is a transition, and we're learning what their needs are and learning more about the members. But I think overall good. I think it's fun.
Sure, go ahead. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But you have no concerns about the capacity of your organization to meet their needs?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Schwartz, it's certainly, it is an added duty to what we are doing at Workforce Services. We feel that it's a great fit in terms of their mission and our mission at Workforce Services, in terms of having access to workforce data and ensuring that they have the ability to understand the needs of women in the workforce. So we have a lot of resources through our research and planning division to supply them with that analysis and data. We have our labor standards division within Workforce Services who provide information relating to discrimination in the workforce. So we feel that that's really useful to them. And I think that, it's a great partnership and a lot of promise ahead. But, there are certainly some bumps with transitions. And so we're just trying to figure out the mix, how our staff can assist them. So they are very strong, a great independent group, and we're working to kind of figure out, how best to serve them.
Exhibit A is right in front of you. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Larson.
So Haley, could you help us, because I believe we moved the money last year to you guys, but I think that the administration of that was in a budget bill and perhaps got struck. And so we've got a cleanup bill in the process this year to plant its roots in this agency. Am I understanding? But that needs to happen, is my understanding that correctly?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, yes, the money did move via the budget footnote, but we do need to do some cleanup in the statute. It's still under the Business Council statute at this
And
point.
so, Mr. Chairman, just as a reminder, we had that in the budget bill. The governor struck it because it was not appropriate for the budget bill, and so we've got that being drafted just to make sure everybody understood that it's not currently, that statutorily it's not there, but that's the end effort and everybody's on board. We just need to get it done.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's correct.
So just to follow up, is that who's bringing the bill? And
It's being drafted right now. It's got a couple of co-sponsors. If we wanted to make that a JEC bill, because we done it last year, we could, Mr. Chairman.
I would suggest that would have more likelihood of.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, actually, the bill is I requested that bill draft. It's done, and it's going to be a House Appropriations Committee bill. At some point, I will be presenting it to you in the next few weeks.
Okay.
I just want, Mr. Chairman, just want to make sure we were all on the same page. You guys understood. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask one other question?
To the director, as I looked at your federal funds there, and the question come up to my mind on programs that are receive federal funds, do we have any of them that have a maintenance of effort component to it? And if we do, could you just note that as we go through and what those obligations are?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. Thank you.
All right, continue.
There we go. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Continuing on page 29, This is our technology replacement request for this unit.
Thank you. Keep going.
Moving on to page 32, this is our unit 0125. This is our Workforce Development Training Fund and Senior Community Service Employment Program. This unit has 2 exception requests. The first request is a 2-part. The Wyoming Childhood Governance Task Force has studied the alignment of early childhood education programs within the state and has made the recommendation to be housed within the Wyoming Department of Education to better align with the developmental and educational goal for Wyoming's children. Priority 6A and 6B reflect a transparency effort that we worked on with Director Hibbard with the Budget Office. In the 21-22 biennium, the full award amount was not set up. The first request is to increase spending authority by $58,808 so that the Head Start move will then mirror the Department of Education's request to increase their authority.
Thank you. Just on the, I'm on page 34, looking at the Special Revenue Fund. There was a Workforce Development Training Fund. And so you've got, ultimately that is the, does that come off the UI fund? Is that revenue off the UI fund? Is that
That is
right?
correct.
And so we're seeing a continuing. And so so with this fund, you're going to try and be roughly at equilibrium here. You're trying to match this up so that your expenditures just pretty much equal the revenues, right? Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, if I understand your question, yes, I think that's correct. The Workforce Development Training Fund really is a fund that in statute provides to use these funds for anything that's training related. We've looked at that fund and recognized that we haven't been spending it the way we have the availability to do that. So we're increasing those amounts. But yes, I think you're correct.
I mean, I'm watching it. So in 17-18, it was at 5 million. Then before this one, it was 6.8, almost 7. Now it's at almost, so coming in, the estimate for coming into this biennium, so it's 7.8. So your future is looking it down. So anyway, yeah, just taking a look at that. Obviously, we don't want it to accumulate unless it rolls back into the fund or something like that, right? So.
And Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. We were not aware, and thank you to Senator Kinski. I think he was the one that brought it to our attention. We did a 10-year survey of how those funds had been spent and the amounts that had gone out into communities, and recognized that when we made some changes in 2019 to really provide a little bit more oversight of the fund and oversight of how the monies went out to individuals for training, that 10-year look back really gave us an idea that, and a recognition, we weren't spending those monies like we used to be. What we're doing now, we've got emergency rules ready to go. We're ready to increase those amounts for training fund dollars, as well as internship and apprenticeship dollars, quite dramatically, in fact, for communities, at least for the next 2 years, so that right now, when we really need those monies for upskilling our employees out there, we have the opportunity to do that. So we're ready to go. We're waiting on some database issues, but we'll be rolling that out hopefully in the next several months.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Vice President.
Quick question on the overall scope of the workforce training, and I'm not familiar right now, but Wyoming Business Council used to also have similar programs. Is there any coordination between the Business Council and your office on these workforce training type programs, or is there still anything? And I don't know of Business Council, whether they're still running those type of programs.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Greg.
Chairman, Senator Hicks, I don't know if they're running those programs or not. So as it relates to that question, I would say we haven't had that discussion, but I will tell you that the interaction between the Business Council and higher education, especially through the WIP initiative that you've heard about, as well as workforce services, is increasing and is much better all the time through some of these efforts. And looking at some of the ARPA proposals, what you'll see is a real intersection between a lot of those proposals and the threading the needle between some of these funds so that the funds really build on some of the initiatives. Training funds will build on some of the community college or the UW initiatives, or with the business council initiatives. So that interaction you're talking about is absolutely occurring, I think much better than it has been before.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, continue.
Turning your attention to page 37, this is the technology replacement request for this unit.
Go ahead, Representative.
Just would also acknowledge your priority 6B, moving the Head Start to the Department of Education. Hallelujah. Never could understand why that was in your division and your office. So good move. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you like me to see?
You're full of, you know, it's nice to see you in a good mood passing out compliments today. It's good for you, Representative Larson. Yeah, yeah. It's a nice change. Anyway, thank you. Continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to move on to the next unit, which is 0135. Starts on page 41. This is our quality childcare unit, and there are no exception requests.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Thank you. Continue.
Okay, page 44. This is our Serve Wyoming unit, 0140, and there are no exception requests.
Anything in particular about, how's that program going overall? Are you seeing an increase, or is there, are you still seeing the interest in it that was before, and the ability to find willing volunteers and pair them with people, nonprofits and other agencies that need that help?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. McCamey Simone has some additional information on that program.
I hope it is.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Holly McCamey Simone. I'm the Workforce Program Administrator. And Serve Wyoming is a nonprofit corporation, and it's a pass-through through DWS. It really helps get job seekers into working with nonprofits. And they did struggle a little bit because of COVID, and some of those entities were closed. But overall, to date, Serve Wyoming has placed a total of 595 AmeriCorps positions, which is quite a lot considering they had to do that during COVID. So there is still an interest. Our nonprofits benefit from that. And then our folks get those hands-on work experience, job skills, and mentorship through that program as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the update. All right, continue.
Okay, we will move on to page 47. This is our employment and training unit 0150. We do have several unit exception requests on this unit. The first one is on page 51. This is a position budget correction from 0150 federal funds to 0301 federal funds. On a housekeeping correction on the chart that was included as part of the table, that bottom number should read 149,509, not 146,509.
And that's on the exception request?
Yes, in the
Okay.
narrative. However, the tables are correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
Thank you. Turning your attention to page 52. This exception request position move mirrors page 20 and 21. This is a supplemental budget correction.
Okay, thank you.
The next position adjustment begins on the bottom of page 52 into 53. This is a budget correction moving a position from 0301 federal funds to 0150 federal funds.
Okay.
Page 53, this is another budget correction, moving this position from 0201 with a 22% general fund, 78% federal fund split to 0150 federal funding.
Continue. You're fine. You're doing great. Keep going.
On the next page, 54, this is a revenue correction only. This is for 0150 general funds to a split 45% general funds, 55% federal funding based on how this position spends their time. At the bottom of this page, 54, at the recommendation of the budget office and in consultation with the governor's office, this final position adjustment exception request, this is to relinquish an AWAC position and request an FTE in its place. The amount reflected here is for the difference in benefits amounting over $24,000. Again, I'd like to point out our overall general funding has decreased for budget requests.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Turning on to page 55. This is our priority number 4. This is our apprenticeship state expansion grant. This grant has previously been approved through the B11 process, which included 2 AWAC positions. We are anticipating greater efforts towards apprenticeship programs and an even greater increase in future funding from Department of Labor. For these reasons, we decided to include this program as part of our standard budget. Additionally, at the recommendation of the budget office and in consultation with the governor's office, we are requesting that these 2 positions be FTEs. As the governor mentioned in his opening remarks, this increases transparency by accurately reflecting staffing where AWACS have been the custom and will greatly improve our recruitment and retention efforts for this grant.
All right, thank you. Continue.
Thank you. Moving on to page 56. This is our priority number 8. This system is used in all of our workforce centers across the state, assisting job seekers find employment and training resources, as well as employers to find qualified candidates. Our workforce centers could not carry out its mission without its application. This is also a federally mandated program for data reporting for the Department of Labor.
Thank you. Continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to the bottom of page 56 into page 57 is our technology replacement for this unit.
I'm still waiting for Representative Larson's question about maintenance agreements on software. It didn't come, so keep going.
Special training.
Oh, okay, all right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to page 62, this is our state mine inspector, unit 0190, and there are no exception requests for this unit. Moving on to page 68, unit 0191, this is for mining exams, and there are no exception requests for this unit. Okay, moving on to page 73, this is division 200, unit 0201, this is vocational rehabilitation. We do have a few exception requests in this unit, and I will point out that Representative Larson, per your question, this is the federal funding where we have the maintenance of effort requirement and also a 22% state match to those funds. The first exception request is found on page 80. This is a supplemental budget cut correction, moving from 0201 split general funds 22%, 78% federal funding to 0501 other funds.
So while we're in the middle of vocational rehab, as you're talking about that, just a general broader question as we're working through what I guess is now being called the Great Separation. Watching the employment trends, workforce trends nationwide as well as in Wyoming. I'd just be interested in what insights do you have with respect to what is going on in the workforce? The COVID's been a major disruption. We have people doing all kinds of examinations. You identified some earlier in your narratives. Just interested in your perspective on where about workforce trends and in general, and in particular in Wyoming, that you see or are concerned about or that you're watching for?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a multifaceted question, and
yes,
it's
it is.
one, I was at a recent conference and everyone's scratching their heads, whether it's childcare issues, it's a recognition that life's short and, you know, they're going to get into a job that they enjoy and take their time to do it. There's plenty of jobs out there. They're not going to take something that they don't want and that they don't like and that doesn't further their career options. Or whether it's people just taking their time out, deciding to take some time with life or retirement. We're seeing a number of retirements. But, you know, the critical part of what I recall from this conference was a speaker that talked about the fact that we've got to change the way that we are hiring and recruiting and retaining individuals, or we're going to become irrelevant. You know, one of the things that he mentioned that I thought, that's a light bulb over the head that I wish I would have thought of that. He said, you know, we look at our work, the hits on our website. We've got people that they get on the website from 2 to 8 in the after, you know, at 2 to 8 p.m. So we have offices open from 8 to 5. No, you know, people don't, you know, 8 to 5 is kind of an old relic right now. And so are people looking for the options to telework? Are they looking for the options to work different schedules? We need to be able to really pin this issue down. What is it we need to do? And we need to adjust to that. And I'm reading article after article. I talk to the team and I say, okay, I read this article today and this is what it said today. And the next day it's something different. We need to pin it down. We need to recognize it and we need to adjust to it. Or we're going to have some more difficulties than we have now. And it's going to get worse before it gets better if we don't. And so, great question. I don't have the silver bullet. Nobody has a silver bullet right now. It's a lot. It's a million different things, and we need to recognize it and be flexible to adjust to it.
And you know, and I think you identified. I mean, it's obviously the compensation package the governor's proposed is one issue that. Bringing it back to the state of Wyoming workforce and the state itself, you know, compensation is certainly an issue, but there's just such a multitude of issues out there. And everybody I talk to, all employers that I talk, private employers that I talk to in my district, and I think everybody's talking to here are experiencing many of the same problems. Compensation is a factor and a substantial factor, but there are many others. And it's, nobody seems to have a handle on this yet.
Yeah. It's difficult.
Go ahead, Representative Larson and Representative Stith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Cooley, following up on the vocational rehabilitation conversation, it's just my opinion that during my tenure in the legislature, probably one of the weak areas that we have in state government is providing opportunities for people with disabilities, particularly developmental or intellectual disabilities, the ability to have a gainful vocation of some sort. And so as we see these citizens of our state in community-based programs, trying to be integrated into the communities, one of the biggest challenges that they have is finding something for them to do. And I at least it's my opinion that gap has kind of been there, and I've not seen anything that's really improved that. And so my question to you is, have I just not seen what's going on? Or if that's still there, what efforts are we doing to try and close that gap? Or any suggestions?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I've got my vocation rehabilitation expert right next to me. I'll leave that up to her.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson.
I think you need to pull your mic closer. Don't be
Okay.
shy.
How's that? Better? So in our vocational rehabilitation program, we work closely with those entities that provide services to developmentally disabled adults and those that are on the Medicaid waiver. A lot of our staff are in the process of getting trained on what we call customized employment. And that there's a heavy focus on community integrated employment. So being part of a business and having the same wages as folks without a disability and having those same opportunities to grow in that business as well. And tailoring, customizing employment and tailoring that to their abilities and making sure that we have accommodations, whether that's rehab technology or other entities that they need, making sure those things are in place. So we partner really closely with those entities. Did that answer your question?
It does, Mr. Chairman, but I'd have a follow-up then, because we really look to the private sector to help provide those opportunities. But my question is then, what are we as a state doing to set an example, and how many people with these types of disabilities do we use within our agencies and within our facilities to set an example for the private sector to follow? So if you could provide me with any of those numbers, that'd be appreciated as well.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I don't have those numbers with me, but I'd be happy to get those for you. I do want to mention that in vocational rehabilitation, we have what's called employment first, and there's a heavy focus on getting folks into different entities, particularly state government. And so they have a lot of contacts with the HR people in those agencies and work behind the scenes to get those placements. We do a lot of work experiences and internships with the intent that if there's not an open position they can be considered for, if they could give a letter of recommendation so that we can help place them in another agency. So it's worked pretty good, and it's a fairly new program, but we're still striving to place people with disabilities in state agencies.
So if you could provide that, I'd be interested in seeing that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Representative Stith.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, no questions at this time. Thank you.
No questions for
Chairman,
this
I do
witness. Okay, thank you. We'll move on.
Mr. Chairman,
Who's? Oh, okay, sure. Go ahead, Representative.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, you mentioned all those hardworking folks that are out in the field, in addition to all you folks working really hard here in the Capitol. How many are there out in the field in the various offices of the 559 would be my first question, just out of curiosity. And then the second one is, you mentioned that with the staffing issues that happen around the state, that you've had to close some places for temporarily, I'm guessing. For what's your workaround there? Is there a notice saying, please call this number? I'm just curious about that also. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kinner, great question. We are about half and half. We've got about 250, I would say, employees in Cheyenne, and the rest are about 250 around this, 250 plus around the state in the workforce centers, and then in some additional smaller offices in other areas. When we have a closure like that, we do a mass social media messaging campaign. We get it around to all of our internal office so that if they get a call and there's a question, they know that that office is closed, what the circumstance is, to the degree we can say, and an estimated opening time. But also what we're doing is we're directing phone calls to other centers. For instance, we had the Worland office, actually, we needed to close, or we had some staffing issues there. We had individuals from Cody driving up there for at least a couple of hours to have an office hours there, and closing maybe like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday or something, and having a Tuesday, Thursday opening. So we're working with the other regional workforce centers to make sure that there's coverage if we've got the availability. The difficulty with that is we've got problems. For instance, the Afton office, we've got one individual in that office. One individual hasn't been able to take a day off, sick leave, anything like that for an entire year. if that individual has an emergency or has a need to be out of the office, that office has to close because we can't hire individuals in Jackson, which is the Jackson Workforce Center, which is where we would send a fill-in staff from. So that's kind of the situation that we've got. And some of our triaging that we do in order to take care of it when we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions? All right, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we do move on to the next exception request, I need to point out that this top one on page 80 has another housekeeping issue. The funding source in the table should be listed as the 22% general fund, 78% federal fund reduction. But again, the tables are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Bottom of page 80, this is a mirror to page 20.
And just want to, on the bottom of page 80 on that position adjustment.
Mhm.
And so as I understand it, what you have is you've identified one generally funded position in one place, and you're just moving that to another because you've identified you need that person more there. So that's just an adjustment within your office to help manage your workload, as I understand. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. It's that contracts unit I was talking about.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the next page is another budget correction, which mirrors page 53. On the next page 82 is the technology replacement for this unit. Okay, we'll move on to the next division, which is our unemployment insurance division. This unit is 0301, found on page 87. The first exception request can be found on page 92. This is our priority number 2 for YUI maintenance and support. This is a mission critical application that manages all of the unemployed worker claims, employer registrations, and employer contributions. This request encompasses all of the technology programs necessary to successfully implement and support all of these functions.
How much extra did you, as you were going through the unemployment, I mean, what was it from last, spring of 2020 through September of this year. I mean, it's been amazing how much money's flowed through that office. And then but you had to put up your websites, you had to stamp it, what was that? I can't remember the term, you don't have to be fully the partial layoff program, the partial assistance program. So how much money did you end up spending in maintenance, and how much additional money did you have to spend in maintenance? I mean, the computer reprogramming and to do all that to get those systems up and get your website up and running. Like it was a pretty much, I thought it was pretty Herculean effort.
Mr. Chairman, that's an excellent question. I don't have that number in front of me, but would be happy to get that to you unless Administrator Simone has that handy.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have that with me, but I just wanted to point out that we did get administrative grants to help pay for those costs.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, just trying to look in hindsight at some of the significant expenses that were done in this. So I just appreciate that. If you could get that to me, that'd be great. Thank you. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 93, this is a funding correction, which mirrors page 51. Moving on to page 94 is another supplemental budget cut correction, moving from unit 0401 general funds to 0301 federal funds. On the bottom of page 94 into page 95 was an efficiency move from unit 0501 other funds to 0301 federal funding. The bottom of page 95 is a budget correction, moving this position from 0301 federal funding to 0150 federal funding, which mirrors page 52. On page 96 is our priority number 3, still position adjustment. This one, for many years, Workforce Services has had the Employer Tax Division, the Work Comp UI Joint Audit Team, split their time between the Work Comp Industrial Accident Fund and the UI Federal Fund. This causes a lot of work on the fiscal side and is also done through a B11 each biennium. This effort is to increase transparency and efficiency, so we determined to request these employees be budgeted under the same division and have each of these positions then split their time between the two funds. This request is to move these 8 positions from Unit 0501 into Unit 0301 and also correct their funding from a 100% other funding to 55% federal funding and 45% other funds.
Okay, thank you.
On the next page, page 97, this is our priority number 7, UI virtual server machine replacements. This cost is necessary to purchase replacement hardware for the UI virtual server machine for in-house applications, which include Microsoft SQL databases, network infrastructure, and security systems, as well as file and data storage backups. On the next page, 98, this is our number 10 priority request. This is a slight 400 series reduction. We're requesting to reduce our 400 series due to decreased use of the mainframe. We do anticipate future cleanup and also reduced use. The next unit can be found on page 104. This is unit.
Good, Representative Larson.
Before we leave unemployment insurance, Director Cooley, you made note in your opening comments on the application process sometimes being a little bit burdensome and difficult. And so do we have the ability to make that easier? And perhaps we're doing that. So if you could please.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Larson, ideally, in this day and age, again, an adjustment that we need to make is we need to have an app for that, right? Individuals now get on their phones and they punch in the numbers and they can do everything through an app. And a lot of states were able to upgrade to an app. Right now, you can get onto ours, but it doesn't fit on your screen. So individuals that were out across rural Wyoming that couldn't get on internet, couldn't get in on a computer, could have gotten into an app and done that. So that's certainly something that we would be looking for and like to do in the future. As we're looking for some of the funding that might be coming our way, that's something that I think we would like to consider with a number of our programs actually, is to have an app for that.
Okay. And I guess, Mr. Chairman, is that's I don't know if emotion, I don't know the right word to illustrate, how people feel when they're unemployed and looking to meet their obligations. And the easier we can make that process, I think, the better for them. And so I'd just encourage you and hope that maybe we could follow up and streamline it as best we can. A lot of frustration, I'm sure you know better than any of us, but thank you for paying attention to that.
Go ahead. Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I just wanted to add that we are in the process of applying for an equity grant, and it helps with accessibility for our UI program. And it's focused on plain language, really intuitive, easier screens to understand, and information that you can easily access in your claim. And we can ask for a number of things, but the mobile app is one of the things that we're going to be requesting. So we're hopeful if we get those funds, that will make it easier for those folks to use.
Just, what are we seeing on just basically numbers of unemployment claims, and what's that looking like right now?
Right now, the numbers are dramatically down. I think the last in talking with the UI division, and Ms. Administrator, please step in. The numbers have basically gone back to their pre-pandemic numbers. When you see the unemployment numbers, the percentage go down though, what you're seeing And with this latest reduction is people dropping out of the workforce, though. It's not individuals that are actually going back to work. And that's why you're seeing this disconnect between the unemployment numbers, percentages going down, but you see Main Street, Wyoming still with all of these vacancies and hiring numbers up there. So that's where the disconnect is people that have dropped out of the workforce. We don't know why they're dropping out of the workforce, whether it's childcare, and that means that they're just not out there actively looking for a job.
Right, their benefits have run out, they're done, but they're not going back into the workforce. It's
Right. And, Mr. Chairman, one of the suppositions that I heard was there were enough funds that they received earlier through some of these expanded funds that they were able to save money, and they're living off those savings now or pulling savings out that they had before. So at some point, we're hoping to see those savings run out. And I hate to say that, but we hope to see those savings run out so we can get them back into the workforce, right? But that's another one of the possibilities.
That's an incredibly capitalist statement. So anyway.
Did I really say that?
Merry Christmas. And then with respect to where we're at, so what does it look like on what we're gonna have to do as far as rebuilding the fund, or what do you see with respect to assessments or for employers as far as assessments on rates, and are we gonna have a fund building, a rebuilding assessment, or are you that far down the road yet?
Mr. Chairman, the fund is healthy, and we looked into that and have some significant numbers for you. I'm going to have Ms. McCamey Simone go over that with you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, so our trust fund is very solvent. We are number 2 in the nation for solvency, and we're usually in the top 3. So we do pretty good there. As you know, the executive order allowed that non-charging for all contributory employers. All the non-charging is complete. Those letters have gone out. Employers can also see that in their YUI screens. And to date, that resulted in $9 million in credits to those employers. And that will affect employers going forward for 22, 23, and 24. We are currently working on our 22 tax rates, and those notices will go out at the end of this month.
And do you see those, I mean, ultimately, the rates themselves, are they going to increase? They're going to be steady? Where do you see those? What do you see happening with those
I
compared to
talked to our UI administrator, and she believes that they will decrease slightly for the next few years.
And is that before you take into consideration the credits, or is that the net? Is that the net?
That is moving forward. So those credit or those were already taken into consideration. Yes.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 104 is Unit 0340. This is our unemployment insurance, employment security revenue unit, and there are no exception requests. On page 109 is our labor standards unit, 0401, and there are 3 exception requests to this unit. On page 111 is a supplemental budget cut correction, moving this position from 0401 general funds to 0601 federal funds. On page 112 is another supplemental budget cut, mirroring page 94. And on page 113 is an additional supplemental budget cut correction, moving from 0401 general funds to 0501 other funds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, moving on to the next unit, 0501. The unit itself starts on page 118. This is workers' compensation and OSHA. The first exception request can be found on page 124. And I'll also direct your attention to the handout that we gave you comparing biennium 21-22 to this biennium for the first priority, number 1 request. This is for our core suite maintenance and support. This is a system that is mission critical that provides workers' compensation the ability to process, manage and pay claims for injured workers, calculate employer premium rates, manage policies, and pay healthcare providers for the services provided to injured workers. The current Power Suite application was instituted in 2012 and is considered end of life. It utilizes an antiquated system and servers that are costly to maintain and will soon lack the security patches necessary to maintain our secure system. You will recall in BFY 21-22, our request was just over $8 million for an ongoing maintenance. It was approved as a one-time funding. We've provided you again with a handout to compare that request to this exception request. And I'll turn it over to Workforce Standards Administrator Jason Wolf to provide more detail.
I think we have a question from Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to actually comment on the prior unit, Unit 401. Just wanted to say that the publication you put out, the Wyoming Labor Force Trends, it's really useful. And I like it that I can look and see what the unemployment rate is in my county. You had an interesting article recently about business formation and how what's the likelihood a business will survive. It's actually, I just wanted to will give a little shout out that I really, I don't always read it when it comes in my inbox, but I do read it, and I really appreciate the effort and quality of the research that goes into it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, thank you for that. And I would just add that team in Casper with research and planning is really remarkable. They've got a lot of institutional knowledge there. If you have a research project that you're interested in, please let us know. I think they would be ready and willing to jump into something like that for you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, continue.
Mr. Chairman, Jason Wolf, Administrator for Workforce Standards with Department of Workforce Services. I'm sorry, I thought we were just going to breeze past that one. So I think we did, as the CFO mentioned, we provided this handout. I think last year we had a lot of confusion on, kind of where we are, what the system does, and what it's for. And I think as the introduction of that system, the system we call Power Suite. I'm happy to say that as of November 15th, we took the update live. We now call it Core Suite. And big shout out to my team and our vendors who helped bring that up. Many of you, I think, have been around long enough. The first system we brought up was probably a well-used four-letter word in these halls. And things didn't go as smooth as we had hoped with that first go live. And this one, I'm happy to say that so far, things really have gone off without a hitch. Had a few different issues with some of the debit card issues that we switched from mailing checks to debit cards.
I can't believe you said that out loud. You just jinxed the whole thing.
I've said it out loud a few times, Mr. Chairman, and nothing's happened thus far. So, but back to the handout before you, I think just kind of wanted to show, given our conversation last year about this system, kind of looking at comparing an apples to apples comparison, which is really, you see what we requested in the 21-22 biennium was the 8.8 million. For the same request this year, we're actually requesting the 7.8 million. So we actually see a reduction in some of that ask of a little over $1 million. The reason the request looks bigger to you today is because we actually added 3 different contracts in there that we didn't have in our 21-22 ask. So all told, looking at the sheet over to the right, you'll see a grand total difference between the 21-22 biennium of about $476,000 still saved, even when we add those contracts in, which, by the way, those contracts we're adding in were actually used in the 21-22 biennium. We just didn't do exception requests for them.
Okay. All right.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, continuing on to page 125, this is a supplemental budget cut correction that mirrors page 113. And on page 126, this is the mirror to page 96, moving those UI work comp joint auditor split. On the next page, 127, this is a supplemental budget cut correction mirroring page 80. And on page 128, This is an efficiency move, moving this position from 0501 other fund, federal fund split to 0301 federal funds. On the next page, 129, this is an efficiency move that mirrors page 21. On page 130, this is a revenue correction only to how this individual spends their time. And then at the bottom of page 130 is the beginning of part 3A for the HR consolidation. In working with the budget office, it was determined that the most transparent way of accounting for this move was to show the move, to A&I for the position, where priority request 3B leaves the authority intact for other funds, as the cost of the personnel will be captured through this Y cap. If there are questions, Director Hibbert can potentially elaborate.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Representative Simpson.
and on a personal note, I want you to know I'll be forever grateful for your department. When I was a young college student, I came here to the legislature for an internship, and I met my wife, who was employed by workers' comp at the time, and we're still happily married 6 children later, and life is great. And so I'm whatever you want, I'm willing to give it to you.
Oh,
I think you just conflicted yourself off the committee, but I do think we should contact Mrs. Representative Simpson and get her side of the story, but anyway. Thank you, Evan. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right.
okay. Continuing on to page 137. This is our last unit, 0601. This is disability determination services. And there is one exception request found on page 138. This is an additional supplemental budget cut correction move that mirrors page 111. And with that, Mr. Chairman, this concludes our exception requests. We do have one last item for discussion, and I'll turn it back to Director Cooley.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We have a fund that we call the Employment Support Fund. And this is a fund that we use to fill in gaps throughout the agency when needed. It's been a critical fund. And I believe all of you have the memo that we drafted to submit to you. The statute, however, causes us some concern in that it requires, although the funds do not revert from at the end of the fiscal year to the general fund, any unappropriated amounts remaining in the fund at the end of any fiscal year shall be transferred to the state treasurer to go into the state unemployment insurance trust fund. The way we use those funds, if you take and sweep those, then if we need them right after that sweep, we're going to be out of luck and hurting. We've used these in our workforce centers to make up for some funding needs there. We've used our Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or our WIOA funds there for employment and training purposes quite efficiently, but certainly we've used those funds down to the wire this year with some efforts. And we're just asking with this statute for your consideration of a change there to allow us to keep those funds in there to maintain so that we have an ongoing source of funds there to fill in those gaps areas where we might need it. This would be something similar along the lines of the training fund dollars that we have, the Fund 528 that are in there that, we just keep in an ongoing, for ongoing reasons and use them. The training fund statute requires that we use those funds for any training purposes. And I would ask that with the employment support funds, some language could be added to that statute or amended to that statute. Something similar could be added there so that the funds are, for instance, maybe continuously appropriated to the DWS to expend it as necessary for support of the workforce system or something along those lines. because that sweep is going to cause us some issues, how we're using those employment support funds.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
go ahead.
Thank you,
Drew?
Mr. Chairman. When we met with the department, I channeled my inner co-chairman Nicholas and asked them to prepare the vaunted one pager, which you now have in front of you on this issue. And basically it's twofold. The one piece of this fix is just to fix a timing issue with regard to the fiscal year and when they need these funds. And sorry. And so that's one piece. The other piece, of course, is more of a philosophical issue that this board takes up all the time about dedicating funds and having those funds go back kind of in perpetuity. So what I'd like to ask is that we do a bill draft and take up both these issues. And I think we can make a good case that this is a very necessary adjustment on the global side. But if not, the timing issue is critical to the department to get changed. And so that's my ask on behalf of the department, is to ask for the global solution, put into a statutory, a bill draft that we can take up. And then, like I say, then we can argue out the larger philosophical issue. But if nothing else, get that time element changed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Questions? Got that?
Mr. Chairman, and I know that Tamara is listening in, but just to clarify, it looks to me like these are two alternatives, that you can't have option one and option two. For example, correcting the timing issue or a reversion at the end of the biennium is inconsistent with continuously appropriated. So it's, as I understand it, option one draft and then a more global option two draft. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I believe that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anything else? Go ahead, Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Cooley Sessions, and you may have addressed this when I had stepped out of the room, but could you talk about workers' compensation experience ratings and any adjustments to legislation that we may need?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Representative Stith, I've got my expert in that area right here. He'll take over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith. So I think just from a current perspective, I guess, right now what we do with workers' comp rates is we review those on an annual basis with our actuary. They look at, paid costs, reserves, pending on claims, and, market income that we've received on the work comp fund investments is all analyzed to determine the next year's rate. For 2022, we are looking at a flat rate change, which means we're not raising it or decreasing it.
Right, Mr. Chairman, and I should probably be more specific. It's my understanding that we have a slight glitch in our COVID legislation. We said that if you get COVID, it's a work-related injury. But if we do nothing, then we'll have a lot of employers out there whose workers' compensation experience ratings will look really bad. And so you have, say you're a subcontractor to an oil field company in Southwest Wyoming, you want to get hired for the next job, but the big oil company says, no thanks. Your experience rating looks really bad because it looks like you had a lot of workplace injuries when in fact you didn't. That's the issue that I'm thinking of.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, thank you for the clarification. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you're talking about is the experience rating. So an employer's experience rating might prevent them from getting a bid on a job is what you're speaking about. And that is a national issue. I think people are used to using the EMR as a measure of safety. I don't technically agree with that. Perhaps when we used a prior formula where we only considered the frequency of claims or how many claims an employer had, that might have been a better measure of an employer's safety. However, a few years back, we did switch to what we call a split rate formula, where we take into consideration not only the frequency of claims on an employer, but also the severity. And I think a well-known issue within the employer community, especially contractors, I actually did have a conversation, I think, with Speaker Barlow at one point. I think Virginia has passed some legislation around prohibiting the use of an employer's experience rating to either give them an opportunity to bid on a job or not.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. It was my understanding that our intention when we did whatever session that was, our intention was to not count it against their experience rating if it's a COVID-related workplace injury, so to speak, but that in fact it is being used against them, and that's the problem. I mean, I'm not looking for a draconian change. I'm looking for more of a tiny change to fix what I think is a problem in prior sessions we passed.
Yeah, I think ultimately that was, I mean, when we did it was during the special, so we stood up the program. We made for a time-limited COVID exception, and I thought that it was, again, I think that's my recollection, it was not supposed to be charged against the experience rating.
Yes, I apologize. It took me a while to get here. So, Mr. Chairman, so I will clarify. So yes, in one of the special session 2020, you all passed Senate File 1002, which instituted the work comp presumption. In Senate File 1002, there was a specific subsection U that was added into 2714-102 that specifically said those COVID-related claims under the presumption shall be non-charged to an experience rating. You're absolutely correct. Then in the next special session, a bill was passed, Senate File 19, where I believe there was a last-minute amendment made to that extended the presumption through March of 2022, but failed to include the subsection U. So technically, what that causes us is to have those COVID presumption claims that have happened from January of 2021 through March of 2022 potentially be charged to an employer's experience rating if that is not corrected. Again, I've had a couple different conversations with folks, your members, and we are fortunate in that it's not an immediate concern because those claims that are happening today won't affect an experience rating until 2023. So if we could possibly look at some legislation to correct that error, I'm certain that was probably the intent. It was just left out. So
we're going to end up with the JAC omnibus screw-up bill. That's okay. So, okay.
We do every year.
Yeah, that's part of our job. So, okay.
Don, let's just make sure that we follow up on this and get something drafted.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anything else, members? Just and just if you would, Jason, just be interested in hearing a little update on COVID claims and what you're hearing on. You know, you circulate a little bit different circles than we do, and so you probably have had some conversations or conferences with your counterparts in other areas. And so if you'd just kind of bring us up on what we think or what the outlook looks like for COVID claims moving forward and what concerns are, and if there's, anyway, just update us a little bit if you would, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So currently, as it relates to COVID claims and workers' compensation, we have roughly about 1,800 claims filed with us as of this week. Many of those are, you know, one and done type claims where they have a medical expense and they're done. We have seen a handful of what they term the COVID long haulers, where people are still experiencing a lot of effects from having the disease or the virus and continue to pay on those. We unfortunately have seen 21 fatalities filed as of this week. And those fatalities range, you know, as many of you are probably aware, if there's spousal and dependent benefits, minor dependents, some of those can reach a pretty high amount. The highest one we have on file now is about 800,000. And but typical average payout with spousal benefits and dependents is around $500,000. So,
okay,
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Director.
So just to follow up on that before we move on. So how does, I mean, if you have someone that there's a presumption that they got that COVID from work that we have to overcome. And then there's also the concept of whether or not they sought proper medical treatment, whether or not they were inoculated. All those kind of things are probably relevant to those kind of issues. But particularly on the death claims and whether or not they actually caught it at work or not. And if we're paying out $500,000 on those things, that can have a substantial impact to the fund. Where, maybe our largesse may be misplaced a little bit in terms of just burden of proof and factual background. That just sounds like a tough position to be in.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, Representative Nicholas, you are absolutely correct. I would add, while I think the presumption was well placed, I think it served a purpose. I think people have gotten benefits definitely that they needed. There is an exposure to the fund there, and especially when we talk fatalities. I think, statewide, just say, there's 1,500 deaths or thereabout related to COVID. If even half of those filed a COVID-related death claim, that's $375 million would be a significant hit to the fund that is not going to be otherwise made up in charge premium. Correct.
And following up on that same thing, I mean, ultimately, I don't know if we're far enough along that you have for you to have an actual determination, but where are you at in looking at the overall exposure to the fund on these, what do you call them, the long haul COVID cases?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, really, yeah, not a lot of data on those. And like I said, out of the 1,500, I'm just guessing, but I think there's around 10 or 15 that we are seeing extended issues with. We've talked a little bit about that with the actuary and how, that exposure remains out there. Right now it's not a great concern to us, but it's definitely something that we realize there's a heavy exposure to the fund. So,
Do you have any, have they given you any ballpark guess of what the total exposure is between both the deaths and the other long hauls that we've experienced, where we're at now?
Mr. Chairman, in terms of numbers, no. I don't know that they specifically have analyzed that, we could ask them to do that. It's just something that they know, there's an exposure out there, and as such, I think we've proceeded with caution, especially when it comes to rates.
Right, and that, I think it's just important that we might know that. I mean, if we've got this one-time funds, if we need to make, I know we've made several deposits, but if we need to make deposits or we need to have a reserve fund that we ultimately, if it's not realized, we could get back without having necessarily go into the UI fund. I mean, there's a number of ways we could approach that, but we ought to make sure we're prepared for it if there's any concern. It sounds to me like it's big enough that it potentially has enough of a significant adverse effect on the fund that we ought to take a look at that. So if you could help us with that, I think that.
Mr. Chairman, yes, we'll get you some information around that.
Thank you. Anything else, members? Thank you so much. Pretty bulletproof.
Thank you.
But wait, we're not to markup yet, so we'll see.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, members of the committee.
All right, with that,
Mr. Chairman?
Don, go ahead.
We have Director Glenn Morrell from the Energy Authority. That's a bit out of order, but if you wanted to take him before lunch, he would be available.
He's always out of order, but we'll take him, yeah. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, team. Great job.
Ah, better? Okay. I did note we have to bring these in real close. Mr. Chairman, with your pleasure. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. It's always a pleasure to, no problem. I always take pleasure to come before this esteemed committee to defend my budget. Always a good time, always a laugh. Just for the record, my name is Glenn Morrell. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Energy Authority. Mr. Chairman, I'll keep my narrative brief. As many of you know, the Energy Authority is only 18 months old. We're still working towards the end of our first biennium budget. The first 6 months of our existence were characterized by coming in, getting our foundations underneath us, and of course dealing with cuts that I did not anticipate on the 1st of July, and I had a wonderful conversation with my chairperson on the 2nd of July. But we managed that. It accounted to approximately $215,000 of cuts from our first biennium budget. But we did a lot of cost reconciliation and optimization of the budget, and we have been successful in executing through the last 18 months. Looking forward into the forthcoming biennium budget, we have a flat budget request, no exceptions. I would like to add a little clarity to our 900 series. That is it's a large portion of the total budget, and there's not a lot of clarity in the book itself. So for example, the 900 series captures all of the compensation and benefits costs at the WEA. We are all contracted employees. So that total compensation and benefits, not just salary, full benefits consideration, amounts to approximately $1,151,000, excuse me, which is equivalent to approximately 55% of the total budget, which is a number that I'm happy with. There is also a $200,000 budget line there for professional services within the 900 series. That is our legal counsel plus our auditor services. And there's another $300,000 budget line for programs and studies, which is essentially a reserve account within our operating budget for ad hoc, unforeseen contracted services that we need to respond to market events. So again, for example, in February of this year, when the administration came out with the lease moratorium, we partnered with the School of Energy Resources, the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, to commission a study of the overall impacts of that decision. As an example, that's what we dip into. Most of our strategic forward-looking studies are actually funded through the state energy program. The balance of that 900 series is a budgeted surplus of approximately $65,000 or 3% of the budget. With that, Mr. Chairman, I can conclude my narrative. I stand ready for questions.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if I understand it right, and this is a slightly different topic than your budget, but on the governor's proposal of how to use various ARPA funds, it looks like the Wyoming Energy Authority would be the lead agency on a couple of those proposals. One is with respect to grant writing, and another looked like it was with respect to special projects. And I didn't know if you had any thoughts about, if that got approved as the governor proposed, what would that mean for your agency, if you haven't a thought about that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative. So the grant writing support, yes, I'm aware of that one. That is one that we submitted. What we're trying to do, if you look at the infrastructure bill, there are literally dozens of programs that are coming through that, which we will have to pursue. The problem that we have at the state level is that we simply don't have the capacity to even write the grants. So that we have an RFQ actually out, closes tomorrow, to seek support to provide two components. One is simply monitoring what is coming out of DC, and making sure that nothing falls through the cracks, but also building strategy as a state to where we're going to play, how we're going to build it. And also there's a second component, which is actually on a case-by-case basis, putting those grants together. The strike team, and I may be mistaken, but I believe that's a business council allocation, or am I not?
Mr. Chairman, you're correct. It lists Governor's Office, Wyoming Business Council, and the Wyoming Energy Authority as all three leading that special projects line item.
Okay, good to know. That's my understanding of that, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Representative, is that I do know that they are looking for capacity support also, the same sort of problem. I believe the language talks about strike teams or special purposes groups to go out after a particular opportunity. And we're going to run into the same problem where the standing headcount at the Energy Authority or Business Council already has a day job. And how do we go after some of these particular opportunities? As an example, the hydrogen hub concept, that is my responsibility within the Energy Authority. I get to spend maybe 3 to 4 hours a week on that. Idaho National Labs have 2 full-time people. So they're spending 80 hours a week going after that opportunity. So that's an example where we just simply need capacity to go after these opportunities. In the grander scheme of things, we're looking at potentially billions of dollars coming into the state, and a little support can go a long way.
So following up on that, if I could, Glenn, is since you've come in, it just seems like the environment has changed for our state with possibilities over a broader range of energy options. And I'd just kind of like to get your perspective or thought from your vantage point on potential challenges of reaching that potential and concerns that maybe you have with energy.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it's a great question. I'm not sure we have enough time, but yeah, there are changes. It's a very, very rapidly evolving world now in the energy sector. I don't think that'll come as a surprise to any of you here. It is changing very, very quickly. One thing is good though, is that a lot of those, the tsunami of capital and investment coming from the East Coast is very, very well aligned with our strategy. As an energy state, our energy strategy is very forward looking. It's very much, it has a vision of transforming a traditional energy economy in a way that is sustainable in the future. So that's good. The challenge though is simply, and I don't want to sound like we have challenges above and beyond any other agency. It's every other agency in the state has capacity issues. But we have an office, for example, of 4 people to secure and sustain an energy economy with a commodity value of $20 billion. It was equivalent to that of Norway. I can guarantee you that Norway has more than 4 people trying to sustain their energy economy. So, and the other agencies that are working hard in this space, the School of Energy Resources, Business Council, Hansel Recovery Institute, they all have the same issues. So I don't want to sound that we're special or anything. But it's going to come to reality at some point that certain things are just not going to get done. And I have a list actually in this document of things that we'd like to do. We just have to keep punting it down the road because we don't have the resources to execute. And we just have to prioritize what we're working on day-to-day basis, which is what we do.
You have follow-up or you? Okay, thank you. Anything else for Glenn? Anything else for Glenn? Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Hope you have a Merry Christmas and we're glad to see you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Dawn, anything before we take a noon break? Kevin, anything for us? Nice tie.
Thank you. I've worn this for 8 consecutive years on this very day with Jay.
Ho, ho, ho.
I was in a panic this morning.
I thought you would
because-
say since 1962.
Oh,
So this
Yeah, where's
morning I
that
was in
over?
a panic because I couldn't find it, and I'm thinking I would break, the process that we're enjoying so far with our budget by not having that tied on.
yeah, don't break the streak, brother.
Don't break the
Don't
streak.
mess with the streak. All right, Don, anything for us?
No, Mr. Chairman, the Gaming Commission will be available right after lunch, then followed by the Oil and Gas Commission and the Geologic Survey.
All right, great, thank you. All right, anything else before we, all right, we'll stand in recess until 1 o'clock.
So not gaming commissioner?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the Gaming Commission will be available at 1.